Tonight, we're pulling off the highway and stepping into the eerie stillness of Texas rest areas, where travelers swear the night never truly sleeps. From whispers echoing inside empty bathrooms to figures that vanish beneath flickering lights, these are 20 terrifying true encounters at Texas rest areas, stories that will make you think twice before stopping on your next long drive. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. I was 19 when it happened, still too young to know what kind of things stay with you for the rest of your life. The kinds of things that crawl out of memory years later when you're trying to sleep. I had just finished my second semester at college in San Marcos, and I was driving north on I-35 to spend a few days back home in Waco. It was late, close to midnight, and I had already made the mistake of chugging too much cheap coffee to keep myself awake. It had the opposite effect. My hands jittery on the wheel, my head buzzing and restless. I decided to pull into a rest stop a little north of Austin. One of those simple ones with a row of vending machines, a few picnic tables, and a brick building with bathrooms. The lot was almost empty except for a single sedan with its headlights off. I parked under one of the overhead lamps and stepped out, stretching my legs. The air was warm, humid, the kind of sticky night air that carries the smell of asphalt and cut grass. I headed toward the vending machines with a couple of crumpled bills in my pocket, figuring a cold soda would settle my nerves before I got back on the highway. That's when I noticed her. She was standing by the vending machines, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. She was barefoot, her hair hanging long and tangled, wearing a simple white dress that looked like it belonged to another decade. She was crying quietly, her face buried in her hands. I stopped where I was, unsure what to do. She didn't notice me right away, just stood there with her thin shoulders shaking under the humming glow of the vending machine lights. "Hey," I said gently, trying not to scare her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't look up. The sound of her crying seemed muffled, like it was coming from somewhere deeper than her throat, almost too low for someone that small. I glanced around, half expecting to see a parent or another car, but the lot was silent except for the faint rush of trucks on the interstate. I moved a little closer. "Do you need me to call someone? Are you lost?" That's when she lowered her hands, just enough for me to catch the glisten of tears on her cheeks. She looked at me and her eyes were so dark they barely reflected the fluorescent light. I froze. For a moment she just stared back with an expression I couldn't read. Part sadness, part something heavier, like she knew me when she couldn't have. My throat felt dry and I tried to say something else, but no words came out. Then, as if nothing was strange at all, she turned back toward the vending machine, her shoulders rising and falling as the crying resumed. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the unease. I figured the smartest thing was to get a soda, maybe give her space, and then if she was still there I could try again or even call the authorities. So I slipped a bill into the machine and pressed the button for a Coke. The can rattled down into the slot with a hollow clank. I bent to grab it, and when I straightened up again she was gone. Not walking away, not running into the lot. Just gone. The spot where she had been standing was empty. My heart began to race. I spun in a circle, scanning the lot. The sedan was still parked under the trees. No car had pulled out. No one had walked past me. The only sound was the buzz of the machine. Then I noticed the footprints. Wet, small, bare feet printed across the concrete, glistening in the light. They led away from the vending machines toward the brick building that held the bathrooms and the storage room. I followed them slowly, each print still damp as though she had been walking through puddles, though the pavement was bone dry everywhere else. It hadn't rained in weeks. The footprints stopped at the maintenance closet door. It was locked, a heavy padlock threaded through the latch. I tugged at it out of instinct, solid and rusted. The footprints ended right there, pressed close to the threshold as if she had walked directly inside. I stood there for what felt like minutes, the night pressing down on me, every hair on my body rising. I knew I should walk away, get in my car and leave. But curiosity has a way of strangling common sense. I bent down, touched the concrete just past the door, and my fingers came back wet. Something moved inside the closet. A faint shuffle like fabric against wood. A sound too deliberate to be dismissed as imagination. I jerked back, nearly dropping my soda, and stared at the door. The padlock rattled softly once without me touching it. That broke me. I bolted back to my car, fumbling the keys and finally yanking the door open, throwing myself inside. I started the engine, headlights blazing across the lot, and for a split second I thought I saw her again in the glow. Standing beside the vending machines, looking at me with those bottomless eyes. I peeled out of the rest stop and didn't slow until I was miles up the interstate, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, some runaway kid, maybe a hallucination from the caffeine in the late hour. But the wet prints stayed in my mind. The next morning, when I finally got home, I tried to shake it off. But I couldn't resist searching online, typing in phrases like "Girl I-35 rest stop north of Austin." I didn't expect anything. I found a few old threads buried in forums, travelers talking about seeing a young girl at night by the vending machines, crying, vanishing, wet, footprints. One post from years ago mentioned a girl who drowned when a flash flood swept a car off the road near that rest stop. The body was never recovered. I don't stop at rest areas anymore. I'd rather drive tired than risk pulling into one of those lonely lots again. Because I know if I ever see her a second time, if I ever get close enough to hear what she's really crying for, I might not make it back to the car. And even now, when I think about it too long, I swear I can still smell damp concrete and river water in the air, no matter how dry the Texas summer is. It was late evening when David and Marcus pulled off I-20 just past Abilene. They had been driving since Lubbock, trading the wheel back and forth, their cooler of Dr. Peppers and half-smashed gas station sandwiches sitting between them in the back seat. They weren't in a rush, not really. Just two friends heading to Dallas for a weekend where Marcus's cousin had promised them a place to crash and a night of heavy drinking in Deep Ellum. The drive was long, though. Endless flat stretches where the highway looked like it had been stretched tight over the land. So when they saw the blue rest area sign and the lit picnic tables tucked under a copse of oaks, they figured a break couldn't hurt. They pulled in under the yellow sodium lights. The air was cooler than it had been all day, but there was still that sticky September heat that clung to shirts and made the steering wheel slick. Crickets screamed from the brush, a wall of sound that pressed in on the quiet lot. The picnic tables sat under those old metal shelters Texas likes to bolt down over concrete pads, painted brown, the paint flaking. Beyond the security lights, the tree line gathered close, black and thick. They picked a table near the middle and sat down with the remains of a bag of chips, the gravel crunching under their sneakers. Marcus lit a cigarette and leaned back, looking at the sky. The stars were faint, washed out by the rest stop lighting, but you could see Orion coming up in the east. They didn't talk much, just breathed in the humid night and let the hum of trucks on the interstate blur into the crickets. That was when David froze. He had been glancing out toward the tree line, not expecting to see anything at all. But he swore just for a second there was movement between the trunks. Tall, upright movement, not the low scurry of a raccoon or the leap of a deer. He blinked hard, leaned forward, told himself it was nothing. Then Marcus said, real low, "You see that?" David turned his head, slow. The trees were lit up in patches by the security lamps, strips of pale orange light alternating with thick shadow. The picnic tables were deserted except theirs. The gravel lot was empty except for their sedan and a long-haul semi that had gone dark. But beyond, between the trees, there was a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't cast by anything. They could both tell that immediately. It moved wrong, stretched long and thin like a person's shadow under a noon sun. Except this one shifted side to side as if walking. Then two more followed it, sliding across the trunks, tall and human-shaped, but with no people to cast them. Marcus stubbed his cigarette out and stood. "Nope," he said, though his voice cracked like he wasn't even convincing himself. David's pulse thudded in his throat. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained. "Probably some people back there. Shadows from the light," he said, though the light only hit the first few rows of trees and what they had seen was deep in the dark. Then one of the shadows stopped moving. It stretched tall against a pale oak trunk, head and shoulders distinct, arms long. Except there was no figure there, no body, just the outline of one. It held still while the other two drifted closer. David swore it turned toward them. Though how could a shadow without a face turn? Still, he felt it like heat on the side of his head. The night sounds were gone. Neither of them noticed when the cricket stopped, only that the silence was too thick. Marcus whispered, "Let's go." They started toward the car, walking fast. Their shoes scuffed loud against the gravel, each step sounding wrong in the silence. David made the mistake of looking back. The shadows had left the trees. They stretched out long, slipping onto the gravel lot as if the ground itself was a canvas. He saw one smear across the front bumper of their car, blackening it like oil. They broke into a run. Marcus yanked the passenger door open and dove in while David fumbled the keys with sweaty hands. He shoved the key in, twisted, and the engine coughed before catching. Headlights flared against the trees. For a split second, the three shadows loomed, taller now, distorted, stretching across every trunk, like giants leaning down. And then they were gone. They peeled out, gravel spitting, fishtailing onto the service road. Neither of them spoke until they had merged back onto I-20, the speedometer climbing past 80. Finally, Marcus said, voice shaking, "There was nobody there, man, nobody." David gripped the wheel tighter. "I know." They drove another hour before pulling into a Love's truck stop. The lot was bright, humming with engines, alive with movement. Normal. Safe. They didn't say much while filling up, just stood in the fluorescent glow. But when David bent to screw the cap back on, he noticed something smeared across the side panel of the car. It was faint, almost oily, like grease or soot. 3 long streaks side by side, angled downward as if something tall had dragged its fingers along while they drove away. He didn't tell Marcus. He just got back in the car and drove, keeping his eyes fixed on the endless ribbon of highway and the black trees beyond the lights, trying not to see shapes shifting in the dark. The men's room at the rest stop off I-35 south of Laredo smelled of bleach and diesel fuel from the trucks that idled outside. I had been driving since Corpus, running a long haul that wouldn't get me back to Houston until Tuesday if the weather held, and I had needed a bathroom for the last 30 miles. The place was nearly empty when I pulled in. Just a beat-up Chevy with a camper shell parked crooked across 2 spots, and a Border Patrol SUV rolling slowly through the lot like a shark circling bait. I should have known better than to stop. Every driver has stories about these stretches, about the rest stops where things don't feel right but fatigue will make you take risks you'd normally steer past. I pushed through the heavy metal door and stepped into the tiled room. It was fluorescent lit, echoing and lined with urinals and 2 stalls at the far end. The air was cooler than outside, but it carried a dampness that clung to my skin. I unzipped at the urinal closest to the sinks when the sound started. A dull, steady thud like someone pounding with the heel of their hand. Then harder, faster. Whoever was inside that far stall was hammering the door as if they were trapped. "Hey, you all right in there?" I called out, my voice louder than I meant in that empty space. The pounding didn't stop. It changed rhythm, more frantic, then paused. The silence stretched until it felt like the air itself thickened, then came again in a burst of furious hammering. I zipped up and took a step toward the stalls, heart thudding in time with the noise. I expected to hear a voice, maybe a groan, maybe some drunk who'd locked himself in and passed out. But nothing came except that pounding, a sound too mechanical, too deliberate. I tried the stall door next to it, empty. I crouched a little, looking at the gap under the locked one. No feet. Just shadows shifting across the tile. Shadows that didn't match the motion of any body. I froze there, crouched like an idiot, watching shapes slide back and forth with every slam. I reached out and shook the door. "Open up, man." "You okay?" My knuckles touched metal. Cold. Colder than the room should have been. The pounding stopped instantly, as if my touch had short-circuited it. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then from inside came a slow scraping. Nails or something sharper dragging across the steel. The sound crawled into my chest and made my stomach turn. That was enough for me. I backed away, muttering something about calling security, and washed my hands with fingers that trembled against the soap dispenser. When I pushed back outside, I nearly ran into the night guard making his rounds, a pot-bellied man with a flashlight slung low on his belt. I told him about the locked stall, about the pounding, about someone being trapped in there. His face didn't change much, just tightened around the eyes. "Which stall?" he asked flatly. I showed him and he followed me inside. He knocked on the door. Nothing. He rattled it hard enough the whole frame shook. Still nothing. Then he produced a key from his ring, slipped it in, and popped the lock. The stall swung open on squealing hinges, empty. Just the smell of damp metal and the walls. Every inch of the inside was gouged with scratches. Long, parallel grooves carved so deep, the paint and primer had been stripped to raw metal. Some marks overlapped, some looked fresh and curling with flecks of rust. It was as if dozens of hands, desperate and violent, had clawed there for release. The guard's light beam traced over them, then landed on me. He shut the stall without a word and relocked it. "Happens," he said, voice low. "You should keep driving." I wanted to argue, demand an explanation, but something in his tone made me stay quiet. I left, but I couldn't get the sound of the scraping out of my head. It followed me down the highway in the hum of the tires and the tick of the engine. When I pulled into my Houston drop yard 2 days later, I went around back to check my trailer. There in the aluminum near the latch were scratches, deep, ragged, too high for any road debris. 4 lines together, dragging down as if something had tried to climb out. And when I unlocked the trailer, the faint chemical stink of bleach and damp metal spilled out, though it had been loaded with nothing but pallets of dry paper goods. I didn't take that road again. I told dispatch I'd run east, west, north, but not down near Laredo. Truckers talk, and I started hearing other versions. Doors that rattle at midnight, stalls locked when no one's inside, drivers who hear voices whispering behind them while they stand at the urinal. Some even said the scratches move, that they shift around the stall, spelling things out if you stare too long. I don't know if I believe all of it, but I believe what I heard. I believe what I saw, and I believe that some doors, no matter how badly someone is pounding to get out, should stay locked forever. The night was dry and windless when the Garza family pulled off the farm road just outside San Angelo. It was late enough that the highway behind them had gone nearly silent, the only sound the ticking of their cooling engine as Raul put the truck in park. His wife Maribel stretched her legs, and their 2 kids, Diego and Camila, were half asleep in the back seat. They had been driving from Del Rio after visiting Maribel's parents, and the stretch past the Pecos always felt longer than it should. Raul wanted a quick break, just a few minutes to breathe before pushing the last 30 miles home. They pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of an old roadside store that had closed years back. A faded Coca-Cola sign leaned against the building, and the single lamp over the lot flickered every so often. Raul noticed another car there, a dull brown sedan idling near the far corner, its headlights glowing steady against the stucco wall. He figured another family was stopping for the same reason. Maybe somebody stretching their legs or trying to calm a restless baby. Maribel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That car's running," she said, "but nobody's in the driver's seat." At first, Raul thought she was mistaken. The windshield reflected the lot light, but when he squinted, he saw she was right. The sedan's engine thrummed softly, exhaust curling from the tailpipe, but the front seat was empty. He could see a sagging pile of clothes in the back, shirts and jeans stacked carelessly, maybe old donations waiting for goodwill. "Maybe they're inside the store," Raul said, though even as he spoke, the boarded windows and dusted glass made it clear nobody had been inside for years. He tried to shake it off, but the detail itched at him. He rolled down his window and listened. The sedan's idle was steady, not rough or stalling, almost too steady, like a recording of an engine instead of the real thing. The kids stirred awake when the night air drifted in. Diego leaned between the front seats, staring at the brown car. "Dad, there's no one driving it," he whispered. "Why's it running if there's no one inside?" Raul didn't answer. He started to feel the hairs on his arms rise, a subtle warning he couldn't explain. He'd been raised in San Angelo, spent his life around ranchers, oil workers, old-timers who never spooked easy, but he felt it then, that creeping sense you get when something doesn't belong. Maribel reached over and touched his wrist. "Let's just go. We don't need to stop here." Before Raul could agree, the sedan's headlights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The engine coughed, stuttered, and died in the silence. It was as if someone had turned a key, but no one sat inside to do it. The lot sank into stillness, the lamp above buzzing faintly, insects ticking against the glass. Camilla started crying softly in the back seat. She was only 7, sensitive in a way her brother wasn't, and she clutched her little blanket to her chin. "I don't like it here, Mama," she said. "It feels wrong." Raul swallowed hard. He wanted to dismiss it, to explain it away, but his throat was dry. He opened his door, just a crack, intending to step out, but the cold hit him harder than it should have for a West Texas night in late September. The air that came off that sedan was cooler, sharper, like walking into a meat locker. He closed the door again. Something shifted in the sedan. A shadow slid across the windshield, quick, like someone had leaned forward in the front seat. Raoul froze. Maribel gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "You saw that," she whispered. "Yes," Raoul said. The sedan's cabin went dark, but not because the headlights were off, they already were. It was darker than it should have been, like the interior had swallowed light. Raoul thought he saw movement in the back seat, the mound of clothes stirring as if something beneath them was shifting. A thud echoed from inside the car, a single heavy knock against the glass. Diego yelped and shrank back. Raoul gripped the wheel, heart hammering. He tried to reason. Maybe some vagrant had crawled inside, maybe someone was passed out drunk and the car just kept idling until it finally stalled. But the way the headlights had shut off on their own gnawed at him. Then the sedan door clicked. Not opened, just clicked, like the latch had been tested. Another click followed, louder this time, as though invisible hands were trying the locks from the inside. Raoul didn't wait any longer. He turned the key and the truck roared back to life. Maribel was already telling the kids to hold on, her voice shaking. Raoul threw it in reverse, gravel crunching under the tires as he backed toward the highway. His headlights swept across the sedan one last time, and in that slice of white light he saw it. Every window fogged from the inside, a thin sheen of condensation except for 4 clear ovals. Handprints pressed flat against the glass, sliding downward like something desperate had clawed at the windows from within. Raoul spun the wheel and shot back onto the farm road, his pulse hammering in his ears. Maribel kept glancing behind them, but the lot shrank to nothing in the rearview mirror. The kids cried softly and Raoul tightened his grip, forcing himself not to look back again. They didn't stop until they reached their neighborhood in San Angelo. Only when they pulled into the driveway and shut off the truck did Raoul realize his shirt was damp with sweat. Maribel wouldn't meet his eyes. Diego finally asked the question they'd all been avoiding. "Dad," he said, "what if the clothes in the back seat weren't clothes?" Raoul couldn't answer. That night, long after the kids had gone to bed, Raoul sat awake in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the pecan trees outside. Every set of headlights that passed on the distant road made him tense, half expecting to see a dull brown sedan idling by the curb. He told himself it was just a car, some abandoned junker that happened to scare them. But when he closed his eyes, he saw those handprints sliding down the glass, and the unnatural way the lights had died without a driver in sight. For weeks after, Maribel refused to stop at any deserted pull-off, and Raoul found himself scanning every parked car on the roadside. Once, near Cristobal, he thought he spotted the same sedan tucked against the tree line, its body dull and forgotten. But when he slowed for a second look, it was gone. No one ever believed him when he mentioned it, but deep down Raoul suspected the car wasn't abandoned at all. It was waiting, and whatever rode in the back seat was still searching for someone to drive it home. Highway 59 is one of those stretches of road that has a way of wearing a person down. It's long, flat, and empty in a way that makes the night seem bigger than it ought to be. I'd been working the late shift at the hospital in Lufkin, and by the time I signed out and got into my car, it was close to midnight. The ride home should have been easy, just another hour south toward Houston, but exhaustion clung to me like a wet coat. Livingston wasn't far, and when I spotted the glow of a rest stop just off the highway, I decided I'd pull over. A splash of cold water on my face, maybe a few minutes walking around to clear my head before driving again. The lot was nearly empty, just a single pickup parked near the vending machines. The air smelled of pine and asphalt and something faintly sour that made me wrinkle my nose. I locked the car, grabbed my phone, and headed toward the restroom building. That was when I heard it. At first I thought it was an animal. A high, ragged cry rising from the wooded area beyond the lot. But then it came again, clearer this time, stretched out into something that sounded painfully human. A scream, long and tearing. The kind you don't mistake for anything else once you've worked in emergency rooms. I froze under the yellow light of the lampposts. My first instinct was to call out, but something about the sound stopped me. It didn't carry like a voice should. It came in bursts, like a recording starting and stopping, and the way it echoed through the trees felt wrong, like the woods were bending the sound, pushing it out toward me. Another scream came, closer. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my hand shaking harder than I wanted to admit. The dispatcher listened quietly as I explained, then told me she'd send rangers out. She asked if I felt safe waiting. I lied and said yes. The pickup truck near the vending machines had no one inside it now. I was sure it had been occupied when I pulled in, but the lot was empty except for me. I kept my back against the concrete wall of the restroom building, staring into the black tangle of pines. Every part of me screamed to get back in my car and leave, but I couldn't. I was a nurse, I had a duty, and if someone was out there hurt, I wasn't going to drive away. A rustle came from the tree line, a dry crunch of leaves underfoot. My breath hitched and I shone my phone's flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but trunks and brush, but I thought I saw something pale slip behind a tree. Then another scream tore through the air, so close it rattled in my chest. It wasn't a normal scream. The longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't quite shaped right. There were pitches in it no throat could make, edges that grated like metal on metal. Still, my legs moved me forward off the pavement and onto the dirt path that cut into the trees. My light bounced wildly over roots and pine needles. About 10 yards in, I found the first tree. Deep grooves raked down its bark, long parallel lines as if something with claws had torn at it. The wood underneath was fresh and wet, glistening in the light. My stomach knotted. More cries came, pulling me deeper. Each time I stopped, the woods went silent. Each time I moved again, they started back up, always just ahead, as if luring me. The sour smell from earlier grew stronger too, thick and animal-like, mixed with coppery tang. I stumbled into a small clearing, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. The moonlight was stronger there, and for a moment I thought the clearing was empty. Then I saw the marks. Every tree around the circle was scored with the same clawed lines, dozens of them, some so deep chunks of bark hung loose. A scream ripped from directly behind me. I spun, heart hammering. My light caught nothing, but the sound still rang in my ears as if the air itself had torn open. Then something moved just beyond the reach of the beam. Tall, too tall, slipping between the trunks. I didn't wait to see more, I ran. Branches slapped at my arms and face as I barreled back toward the lot. I tripped once, went down hard, but scrambled back up, lungs burning. Behind me, the screams came faster, overlapping, twisting together into something almost like laughter, but shriller, hungrier. When I burst out of the trees, headlights were sweeping across the lot. A ranger truck skidded in, 2 men jumping out. I waved frantically, trying to explain between gasps. They calmed me, told me to stay by the building, then headed into the woods with heavy flashlights and rifles slung over their shoulders. I waited by my car, every nerve jangling. After what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, they came back. They didn't say much, just that they hadn't found anyone, but their faces were pale and tight. One of them carried a branch broken clean in half, the wood gouged with fresh claw marks. They filed a report, took my statement, told me I'd done the right thing. Then one of them leaned in close and said quietly, almost like he didn't want the other to hear, "You shouldn't stop here again, not at night. Folks go missing off this stretch. We find signs, like those scratches, but never bodies." I drove home on shaking legs, the road a blur of yellow lines and dark pines pressing in from either side. I didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway. Even then, I sat in the car for a long time, listening, certain that if I rolled down the window, I'd hear it again, carried faintly on the night wind. I've worked countless shifts since then, seen death and blood and things that stay with you, but nothing has unsettled me like that night on Highway 59. Sometimes when I close my eyes after a long shift, I hear it again, the scream twisting in the air. Not human, not animal, something older, clawing at the trees and waiting for someone foolish enough to step off the lighted pavement and into the woods. I was driving south toward Brownsville on a damp November evening, the kind of night when the sky seems heavy and close, as if the clouds are pressing their weight on the earth. I had been on the road since late afternoon, tired from work up in Corpus, and all I wanted was to reach my sister's house where a hot meal and a spare bed waited. But the miles stretched long, and I pulled into a roadside park just outside town to rest my eyes and refill my thermos. The place was quiet, tucked behind a line of scraggly mesquite trees, with a couple of worn picnic tables and a dim lamp buzzing overhead. The hum of the highway drifted in the distance, but otherwise it felt like a pocket of stillness, carved away from the world. That's when I saw them. An older couple sitting together on the nearest picnic bench side by side, as though they'd been waiting for someone. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat, the kind my grandfather used to wear when he worked the fields, and the woman had a thin shawl draped over her shoulders despite the night being only cool, not cold. Their faces were lined, pale in the weak light, but their eyes were sharp, glinting with the kind of clarity that made you feel pinned in place. I nodded politely, thinking maybe they were just locals out for some air, though it struck me as odd for folks their age to be sitting in a deserted park at night. They spoke first. The man leaned forward, resting his hands on his cane, and said in a voice low but steady, "Son, don't take the road north tonight." I froze a little, the words sinking in strangely like they were heavier than they should have been. The woman nodded, her expression grave. "There are things out there that don't want you passing through." Her accent was faintly Spanish, touched with something older, something rooted deep in the soil of the valley. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Well, I don't have much choice. Gotta get back on 77 sooner or later." The man shook his head slowly. "Sooner or later, it won't matter. If you go tonight, you won't make it where you're going." Something in his tone made me shift on my feet. It wasn't a warning given like advice. It was closer to a statement of fact. I opened my thermos and muttered something about needing to refill at the water spigot. They didn't respond. The woman just kept watching me, her dark eyes glimmering like wet stones in the lamplight. I hurried over, filled my thermos with water that sputtered out rusty and lukewarm, then turned back toward the table, ready to maybe ask them what exactly they meant. But the bench was empty. No trace of them, not even a shuffle of feet in the dirt or the faint scrape of a cane on the gravel. I walked over, heart picking up, and laid my hand flat against the tabletop. The wood was cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been left in a freezer. My breath fogged above it, though the air itself was mild. I stood there alone under the buzzing light, and a weight settled into my chest. It wasn't just the eeriness of seeing them gone so quickly. It was the way their absence felt absolute. Like they hadn't just walked off but had been pulled away, erased. I told myself to get in the truck, lock the doors, and push straight to Brownsville, but the words clung to me like burrs. Don't take the road north. My truck sat waiting in the gravel lot, its headlights catching the low branches of the mesquites. The night beyond the park seemed darker than before, a black stretch pressing against the edge of the lot. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I'd dozed for a second at the bench and dreamed the whole thing, but the cold bite still lingered in my palm where I'd touched the wood. I climbed into my truck and started the engine, the hum of it steady, familiar. The dash clock glowed 10:47. As I pulled out of the lot, my headlights caught the bench one last time. For a split second, no longer than the blink of an eye, I thought I saw the couple again, sitting there motionless, their faces turned toward me. Then the light swept past and the bench was empty. Back on the highway, the world stretched out in silence. The road north shimmered faintly, reflecting the light of my beams, while the southbound lanes felt heavier, as though they led into some endless darkness. Every mile closer to the split where the highway forked, my chest tightened. I kept thinking about the man's voice, the weight of certainty in it. I told myself I wasn't the kind to scare easy, that I'd driven these roads 100 times before. But when the sign for the northbound route loomed out of the dark, my hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The turnoff yawned wide, inviting. I swear the air grew colder in the cab as I passed it, like the whole truck shuddered with relief when I stayed southbound. I didn't breathe until the road curved away and the sign was swallowed in the black behind me. By the time I reached Brownsville, my nerves were frayed and I pulled into my sister's drive like a man being chased. I killed the engine and sat there listening to the tick of cooling metal. The night was still, the neighborhood quiet, but when I glanced in the side mirror just before stepping out, my heart stopped. For an instant, faint and blurred, the reflection showed two figures sitting in the dark at the curb side by side watching. The man in his wide-brimmed hat, the woman with her shawl, their faces pale, their eyes sharp. I spun around, but the street was empty. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the memory. I don't know if I avoided something that night or if I only stepped into the beginning of it. But I know this, the old couple weren't just people. They were a warning, maybe more, and the road north still waits out there, stretching black into the dark. Some nights I wake up with the taste of rust in my mouth and the echo of their voices in my ears. And every time I drive past that roadside park outside Brownsville, I can't bring myself to look at the picnic benches, because deep down, I know they'll be there waiting for me again. She had been driving too long, her eyes burning from the interstate's endless black ribbon. Huntsville wasn't far, but fatigue had set into her bones and the small blue sign promising a rest area felt like a lifeline. The place was quiet when she pulled in, only a pair of trucks idling under the sodium lamps and one car parked off toward the far edge. The lights over the restroom building buzzed with that sickly orange hum that makes the night feel more empty than it already is. She locked her Honda and hurried across the cracked pavement. Inside the bathroom, the air was cool and smelled faintly of bleach mixed with something older, like mildew trapped behind the tiles. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and her reflection looked ghostly in the mirror even before anything strange happened. She splashed water on her face, hoping to jolt herself awake. She leaned down, hands braced on the sink, the water dripping steadily, and when she looked up, there was someone standing directly behind her in the mirror. Her heart seized and she spun around so fast she nearly slipped on the wet floor. The restroom was empty. The stalls stood open, the far one shut but still and silent. No one was there. She turned back to the mirror, breath shallow, hands trembling. At first it was just her pale face staring back, wide-eyed, hair stuck damp against her forehead. Then the reflection smiled. Her own mouth hadn't moved. Her lips stayed parted, breath shallow, but the reflection smiled like it knew a secret. It wasn't quick or sudden. It was slow, deliberate, pulling up into a grin that looked too wide, too certain, and it sent a chill through her chest like ice water. She staggered back, hitting the tile wall behind her. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. She shut her eyes hard, whispering no, no, no under her breath, then opened them again. The mirror showed her face as it should have been. No smile, just her, pale and shaking. She left without drying her hands, bolted into the cool night air and nearly tripped on the curb. The trucks were still there. One driver slumped against his wheel, the other not visible. The car at the far end was gone. She got into her Honda and locked the doors, fingers fumbling the ignition. Her headlights washed over the trees beyond the lot. Black trunks crowding together like they were listening. She drove hard back onto the interstate, hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles ached. The strangeness didn't fade with distance. At first she thought it was just her mind replaying it. But her reflection kept behaving wrong. In the rearview mirror, she could see her face in the dim glow of the dashboard. Her lips moved when she spoke under her breath, but there were moments where the reflection didn't keep up. Once she licked her dry lips and in the mirror her reflection's tongue didn't move. Another time when she glanced at it quickly, she swore it was smiling again, even though her face was locked in fear. She covered the mirror with her hand, then finally adjusted it away from herself, but even that didn't help. She could feel it, the presence of it sitting just one surface of glass away, watching. She pulled into Huntsville near midnight, parking at a gas station with bright lights and people moving around. She needed noise, needed witnesses, needed the world to feel normal again. She went inside, bought a soda she didn't want, and lingered by the shelves pretending to browse. Every reflective surface caught her attention. The glass door of the cooler, the chrome side of the coffee dispenser, the little convex mirror up in the corner near the ceiling. She didn't want to look but couldn't stop herself, and each time she was terrified she'd catch her own reflection smiling when she wasn't. At first, she didn't see anything. Then while she stood in line, the soda sweating cold against her hand, she looked at the security mirror. Her reflection was facing the wrong way. She was staring up at the mirror, but the version of her up there had its head turned sharply, looking off to the side, into some corner she couldn't see. Her throat tightened and she fled before the cashier could hand her change. She didn't want the soda anymore. She drove straight to her dorm parking lot, heart hammering. The brick buildings rose dark and quiet, most of the windows black, just a handful glowing where people still studied or drank or whispered over late-night calls. She carried her bag up the stairs and unlocked her door, flicking the lights on bright. Her little off-campus apartment looked exactly as she'd left it. That was almost worse. She dropped her keys, grabbed a blanket, and sat curled on the couch, staring at her turned-off TV screen. The dark glass reflected her faintly. She tried not to blink. The days that followed blurred. She skipped class, too tired to focus. Her nerves stretched so tight she shook when anyone startled her. She stopped using her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth with her head turned, wiping fogged glass without ever glancing up. But reflections are everywhere. Phone screens, dark windows, the glass covering her microwave. Every now and then, too quick to prove but too real to deny, her reflection would lag or tilt its head differently, or smile when she wasn't smiling. She grew gaunt, sleepless, shadows under her eyes. Friends texted, called, then stopped when she didn't answer. She felt alone, cut off, stalked by something wearing her own face. One night, desperate for proof, she forced herself to face the bathroom mirror again. She locked the door behind her, turned on all the lights, and stood there staring. Her chest heaved with each breath. Her reflection looked back, pale and weak, eyes wide. For a long time, nothing happened. She started to believe maybe it had stopped. Maybe she'd imagined it all. Then her reflection blinked. She hadn't. Her breath caught. She lifted her hand slowly, fingers trembling, and the reflection raised its hand too, but then, just as their movements should have matched, the reflection kept its hand pressed against the glass while hers dropped back down. She staggered backward, shaking her head, whispering, "Please no." The reflection leaned closer, forehead pressing against the mirror from the inside. Its lips parted in that wide smile, teeth bared, too perfectly straight, too many in the back. She screamed and slammed the bathroom door behind her, running out into the night barefoot, not caring that neighbors saw. She didn't return for hours. When she did, the mirror was shattered on the floor, though she hadn't touched it. Shards glittered everywhere, reflecting hundreds of tiny versions of her face. Every single one was smiling. She moved out the next week, dropped her classes, vanished from the campus. Some said she transferred, others that she went home for good. A janitor who cleaned the old dorm months later swore that in the bathroom, if you wiped the steam just right across the new mirror, you could see a girl's smile appear in the glass even when you weren't smiling yourself. He had been driving since dawn, cutting through the endless flatlands of the Texas Panhandle where the horizon seems to go on forever. Amarillo was still a ways off, but the fatigue had set in hard. His name was Alan Crichton, a traveling salesman for an office supply company, the kind of man who lived more in motel rooms than in his own home. That night, after hours of interstate monotony, he pulled off onto a dirt turnout near a windbreak of mesquite and scrub. The road was empty in both directions. The sky was a deep slab of black, the stars scattered across it like glass chips. He left the engine idling, reached over and opened the brown paper sack that held his dinner from a diner in Clarendon. Greasy fried chicken, coleslaw in a plastic cup, and a slice of pecan pie. He balanced the chicken box on the steering wheel and started eating. The wind pressed faintly against the car, dry and restless, carrying the smell of dust and mesquite. That was when he heard it. At first it was only a shifting sound, gravel crunching, faint but distinct against the hum of the idling engine. He looked up from his food, glanced through the windshield and saw nothing. Just the prairie stretching out in every direction, the kind of landscape that made a man feel small, exposed. He chewed slower, eyes moving to the side mirrors, then to the rear view. Nothing. But the sound came again, closer this time, followed by another. Pause. He knew that sound. Alan set down the food and flicked on his high beams. The sudden flood of white cut across the scrubland and caught movement. Several shapes slipped into view, low to the ground, slinking with that practiced, casual menace of predators that had no reason to hurry. Coyotes. At least half a dozen, maybe more. Padding out of the brush and onto the dirt road, Alan exhaled and forced a chuckle. Coyotes weren't unusual out here. He had seen plenty crossing roads or loping along fence lines. But these didn't cross. They didn't scatter at the glare of headlights. They came forward, fanning out in a semicircle around the car. He counted 7, then 8, then 9. Their coats were patchy, matted in places, their ribs showing under the fur, but it was their eyes that stopped him cold. In the beams of his headlights they glowed, not the yellow-green animal shine he expected, but a hard, unnatural white, like shards of ice catching moonlight. Each set of eyes fixed directly on him through the glass. A twinge of unease crept into his chest. He hit the horn. The blare split the night, startling even him, but the pack didn't move. They didn't even twitch. The sound echoed off the empty flatland and died. The coyotes stood their ground, some crouching, some sitting back on their haunches, all watching. Alan's skin prickled. He revved the engine, thinking the vibration might shake them off, but the animals didn't flinch. One of them, a larger male with a torn ear, stepped closer. The white light in its eyes seemed to swell as it entered the brightest part of the beam, until it almost hurt to look at. Alan's hand hovered over the gear shift. He thought about flooring it, plowing forward, scattering them into the brush, but his chest tightened with a strange fear that if he did, if his bumper touched one of them, something far worse would happen. He sat there gripping the wheel, his meal forgotten, the smell of fried chicken suddenly sour. The pack pressed in tighter, their paws soundless on the dirt. A couple circled to the side, shadows flitting just out of sight, and he swiveled his head trying to track them. That was when he realized they weren't panting. Coyotes always panted, always had their tongues lolling in the heat, but their mouths were shut, silent, waiting, watching. The car felt smaller by the second, as if the night were collapsing around it. Alan's breath fogged the inside of the windshield, though it wasn't cold. He tried to tell himself they were just animals, scavengers drawn by the smell of food. But the coleslaw container sat sealed, the chicken box closed. He hadn't dropped anything. His windows were rolled up. Yet the coyotes acted as if they were invited. The large male lifted its head and gave a soundless snap of its jaws, not barking, not howling, just the sharp clack of teeth. The others did the same in quick succession, a ripple through the pack, their jaws clicking like bones breaking. Alan slammed the horn again, long and angry, then shouted at them through the glass. "Get the hell out of here!" His voice cracked with the edge of panic. The night swallowed it whole. The coyotes stayed. Then, without warning, the pack turned their heads in unison. Not toward him, but toward the open black plain beyond the headlights. Their bodies stiffened, tails low, ears pricked. Alan's gut knotted as he followed their gaze. He saw nothing but the scrub and a barbed wire fence sagging along the horizon. But the animals saw something. He knew they did. Their eyes flared brighter, almost painful, as if reflecting some other hidden light. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they began to melt back into the dark. One by one they slid into the brush, their pale eyes winking out until only the torn-eared male remained. It stood directly in front of the hood, so close he could see the ragged line of scar tissue cutting across its snout. For a long moment it locked eyes with him, and Alan felt the weight of something intelligent, something old and patient pressing into his chest. Then the coyote turned, its body dissolving into shadow as if it had never been flesh and blood at all. The headlights shone only on empty dirt road. Alan sat frozen, his hands clammy on the steering wheel, his meal cooling in the passenger seat. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to throw the car into gear. He drove fast, faster than he should on that cracked two-lane road, glancing into his mirrors again and again. Nothing followed. Nothing showed in the beams of his headlights. But when he finally reached Amarillo and checked into a roadside motel, he found his shirt collar damp with sweat and his hands trembling. He told himself it was exhaustion, a trick of the light, maybe even highway hypnosis. But as he stripped off his clothes in the dim bathroom, something made him freeze. There in the fabric of his slacks were faint scratches. Not rips or tears, just shallow lines in the cloth, 3 of them, parallel as if brushed by claws too careful to cut deep. He had been in the car the whole time. The doors had never opened, yet the marks were there, close enough to the thigh that he couldn't ignore them. That night Alan slept with the television on, the volume low, trying to drown out the sound of silence pressing against the walls. Outside the motel, coyotes yipped somewhere in the distance, their voices high and wild. But threaded beneath the yipping, so faint he almost believed he imagined it, came the hard clack of teeth, clicking in rhythm, waiting. The interstate was empty enough that night to make the 2-lane rest area look abandoned. Their headlights swept across the cracked pavement, bouncing against a squat cinder-block restroom building and a row of crooked picnic tables. Beyond that, half lit by a single sodium lamp, was a small playground with 2 rusted swings dangling from a pipe frame. The travelers were tired, both of them yawning and stiff from hours of I-45 traffic, and they pulled in mostly to stretch their legs and grab a soda from the vending machines. That was when they heard it. Children laughing, light and sharp like glass tapping. Both of them froze, each thinking they'd imagined it. But the sound came again, faint and hollow, drifting from the swing set. The chains rattled. They squinted through the glow of the lamplight and saw 2 swings rising and falling as if pushed by invisible hands. The seats tipped forward, then back, then forward again, reaching a rhythm no wind could have given them. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stood there listening. The laughter was clearer now, layered, the kind of sound you'd hear during recess at a grade school, not on a deserted stretch of highway at nearly midnight. One of the travelers said, almost to himself, that maybe a family had stopped and let their kids play while they stretched their legs. That would make sense, except there was no minivan, no headlights, no figures anywhere in the lot. The playground was bare dirt and weed patches. The fence had its back swallowed by black trees. The swings moved harder, chains creaking against rust, but there were no shapes in the seats. Just emptiness rising and falling like something was there but couldn't be seen. The other traveler stepped forward, half curious and half nervous, crunching gravel under his boots. He expected the laughter to fade the closer he got, like a trick of the wind, but it didn't. If anything, it swelled. He swore he could hear words in it now. Childish tones, though the language was slippery like whispers underwater. He stopped when he reached the edge of the playground sand and felt a coldness rise from the ground. Not like a breeze, but like he'd stepped into the shadow of a building. The swings lurched higher, and for a moment he thought he saw small hands clutching the chains, pale and quick, before vanishing as if blinked out of existence. He backed away, muttering that they should leave, that it wasn't right. They climbed back into the car, both trying to act like they weren't shaken. But as the doors closed, the laughter carried on, muffled now but relentless. It followed them as the engine turned over. When the headlights swept past the playground one last time, the swings were still moving, harder than before. One seat twisting like a child had spun it and let go. The sound of children at play rose sharp and close, though the lot behind them was swallowed in dark. The driver pressed the gas harder than he meant to, tires spitting gravel as they pulled onto the interstate. For several miles, neither of them spoke, but both swore they could still hear the laughter faint under the hum of the tires, as if it had lodged itself in the car. They didn't stop again until they were almost to Dallas. And even then, stepping out at a bright station filled with people, both of them felt the air around them like something unseen was still leaning close, waiting. I was rolling east out of Midland after dark, tired from a long haul. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes the neon hum of a truck stop feel almost welcoming. The place sat off the highway, one of those sprawling concrete rest areas with flickering lights, humming soda machines, and the faint smell of diesel mixed with stale coffee. The night was cool, cooler than it had been all day, the West Texas air carrying the dusty tang of mesquite and asphalt. I pulled in, parked my rig and shut it down, thinking I'd stretch my legs and maybe grab a cup of burnt coffee before the last push toward Abilene. The lot wasn't busy. A couple of other 18-wheelers idled toward the back, and a small beat-up Chevy pickup sat crooked in one of the car spots near the restroom building. The fluorescent lights over the picnic area buzzed and drew clouds of moths that battered themselves against the plastic. I walked toward the restroom building, my boots echoing on the concrete, and that's when I noticed him. He was standing by the picnic tables, still as a fence post, dressed in a long coat that looked out of place for that weather. It wasn't freezing, just cool, but the coat was heavy, dark, and hung nearly to his boots. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat, and when I glanced his way, he raised his head just enough that I caught the pale glint of eyes watching me. My gut tightened. I wasn't easily spooked, not after 20 years on the road, but there was something about the way he stood there, silent and expectant, like he had been waiting for me. I tried to shake it off. People hang around truck stops for all sorts of reasons. Some are hitchhikers, some strays, some just looking to bum a cigarette. But when I came back out after washing up and filling my thermos, he was closer. He had crossed the open space between the tables and my rig without me hearing his boots on the concrete. He stood by the passenger side, and when I approached, he spoke in a low, deliberate voice that carried too easily in the stillness of the night. Headed east? I hesitated. Something about the cadence of his words felt off, too slow, like he was measuring each one. I nodded. He didn't smile, didn't shift his weight, just stared at me from under that hat. Give me a lift. It wasn't a request. It came out flat, like he expected me to say yes, like he already knew I would. Against my better judgment, and maybe because I didn't want to deal with confrontation in the middle of a lonely truck stop, I said, "All right, hop in." I reached up and pulled the passenger door open. My eyes flicked toward him, ready to see him climb up the side rail, but the space where he had stood was empty. The gravel where his boots should have crunched was undisturbed. I stared around the lot. Nobody was there. Just the humming of the sodium lights, the droning of diesel engines in the distance, and the chirp of a night insect here and there. I felt my skin crawl. I leaned into the cab, half expecting him to already be sitting there. The seat was empty, but the dark fabric was damp. I touched it, and my fingertips came away wet like condensation, but the rest of the cab was dry as a bone. The smell of the seat hit me next, earthy, damp, like a mix of rain-soaked leaves and old moldy cloth. My stomach tightened and I shut the door fast, circling back toward the driver's side. I climbed in and slammed the lockdown out of reflex. I sat there for a minute, engine off, the silence pressing in. My headlights threw long beams across the empty picnic area, catching nothing but shadows of benches and fluttering moths. I kept waiting for him to appear again, maybe reflected in the side mirror or in the darkness beyond the edge of the light, but the lot stayed empty. After a minute, I turned the key and got the truck rolling, pulling back onto the highway. I thought that was the end of it. But 20 miles down I-20, the cab still smelled damp, and the seat beside me was darker than it should have been, as though the wet had seeped deeper, spreading slow. My radio crackled faintly even though it was switched off, a whisper of static that came and went in low bursts. Then out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the faintest impression of movement. The coat shifting, a shoulder turning. My hand tightened on the wheel and I told myself not to look. I kept my eyes locked on the road, on the pale white lines slicing through the dark, but the whispering started then. Low at first, like wind sneaking through a crack, but it grew into something that shaped words I didn't want to hear. East, it murmured, dragging the word out too long, filling the cab like cold breath. East? Keep east. I nearly pulled the rig over right then, but fear rooted me to the seat. I drove another 10 miles, and with each mile the smell of damp earth thickened until it felt like I was driving through a wet forest instead of dry West Texas scrubland. My windshield fogged faintly from the inside, forcing me to wipe at it with my sleeve. When I finally worked up the courage to glance at the passenger seat, I froze. The damp impression had deepened into the faint outline of a body. The long coat's creases pressed into the fabric. It was empty, but the weight of someone sitting there was undeniable. The whispering stopped then, leaving only silence, but silence felt worse. I floored the accelerator, barreling through the night, every instinct screaming to get away from that seat, that smell, that unseen weight. By the time I reached Abilene, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. I pulled into another truck stop, desperate for light, for people, for proof I wasn't losing my mind. When I opened the passenger door, the seat was bone dry, the smell gone, like nothing had ever happened. But when I looked down at the concrete, there were wet footprints. Not boot prints like I expected, but bare feet, long and narrow, trailing away from the cab and vanishing beneath the shadows of the fuel canopy. I've driven 1,000,000 miles of Texas highway since then, but I don't pick up strangers anymore. And every time I pass through Midland, I keep my eyes forward, never stopping, because I know if I do, he'll be waiting, standing under those buzzing lights in his long coat, ready to ride east again. The rain had been spitting all night across the pine stands of East Texas, slicking the asphalt and leaving the highways shining like dark mirrors under my headlights. I had pulled into the rest stop off Highway 59 near Nacogdoches, one of those places that was supposed to make life easier for long-haul drivers. It had all the usual features, a vending area, bathrooms, picnic tables, but it also had something not every stop offered: showers. They were tucked away in a separate wing off the main building, a row of small tiled stalls with flimsy plastic curtains and an overhead fan that never seemed to work right. I'd been on the road nearly 16 hours, and the thought of steam washing away the diesel stink and road grit was enough to keep me moving despite the late hour. The place was quiet when I walked in, quiet in the way of rural stops after midnight, the soundscape made of far-off truck engines idling and the dripping hiss of wet trees. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that faint flicker that made everything look a shade grayer. I pushed open the heavy metal door to the shower area, and it creaked like no one had bothered to oil the hinges in years. Inside, the air was damp, a stale humidity that carried the faint odor of mold beneath the sharper tang of industrial cleaner. A row of lockers lined one wall, some dented, one with its lock twisted halfway off. On the far end, there were 4 shower stalls. I picked the second from the left, tossed my duffel on the bench, and began stripping down. The sound of the water rushing out when I twisted the knob was like relief embodied, hot and forceful, steam curling up into the room. I stood there under it, letting the heat unknot my shoulders, and for the first few minutes I didn't think about anything at all. My mind drifted, lulled by the rhythm of the spray and the way it drummed against the tiles. That was when I thought I heard something soft and hushed, a murmur beneath the hiss of the water. At first I told myself it was just the plumbing, maybe pipes shuddering somewhere in the walls. But the longer I stood there, the more certain I became that it was different. It had a cadence, a rhythm. Like words, only too faint to catch. I turned off the water, heart ticking faster. The silence that followed was absolute. Just the drip of water from my hair onto the tile, echoing faintly. No voices, nothing. I wiped at my face and listened hard. After a few seconds, I told myself I was being stupid. Places like this always had their noises. Echoes carried strange and tired minds played tricks. I turned the water back on, determined not to psych myself out. But the voices came again, whispers this time, distinct enough that I could tell they weren't random. They were low, sliding syllables just outside my understanding, like a conversation in another room with the door cracked. Every hair on my arm stood on end beneath the spray. I yanked the curtain open and stepped out, dripping water onto the tile. The shower room was empty. Steam swirled in the fluorescent light clinging to the ceiling. I called out a tentative hello, though my voice came out rough and uncertain. Nothing answered, not even the faintest echo. Just silence, oppressive and thick. I went back in, finished fast, the uneasy feeling never letting go. I kept glancing toward the curtain, half expecting to see a shadow pass across it. The whispers didn't come again while I rinsed off, but the impression of them clung in my mind, insistent and hard to shake. When I finally shut the water off and stepped onto the mat, I noticed my bag wasn't where I'd left it. It had been set against the bench when I went in, but now it was pushed over near the center of the room. My stomach sank, cold in spite of the humid air. I dropped my towel and went to check. The zipper was open. My clothes had been taken out, my clean jeans, shirt, socks, underwear, and they weren't just scattered. They had been laid out carefully, one piece at a time, forming letters on the wet tile floor. 2 letters only, G and O, blocky and unmistakable. I froze there naked, water dripping from me onto the grimy floor, staring at the message. Every instinct screamed at me to leave right then and there. My pulse hammered in my ears, my throat dry despite the steam. I spun around, scanning the room again, but it was as empty as before. No doors closing, no lockers creaking, no sound at all except the distant rumble of a truck outside. My hands shook as I pulled my clothes off the floor, yanking them on even though they were damp from the tiles. It felt like being watched, the kind of attention you can't see but can feel pressing against your skin. The longer I lingered, the stronger it got. I didn't bother tying my boots properly. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and pushed through the door into the cold night air. The moment it shut behind me, I almost expected something to follow, but nothing did. The rest area looked the same as it had when I'd arrived. Quiet still, just a few trucks parked under buzzing sodium lights. I hurried to my rig, climbed inside, and locked the doors. My reflection in the side mirror looked pale, eyes wide, jaw tight. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I realized something else. My bag was lighter. Too light, I unzipped it again. The spare set of clothes I'd been wearing when I came in, the ones I'd left folded inside, were gone. Vanished. I searched the cab, every pocket and compartment, but they weren't there. Only the set that had spelled out the word remained. I sat there for a long moment, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Clothes were clothes, but a part of me couldn't stop wondering who or what had taken them and why. I left that rest stop behind without looking back, but I swear the whole drive through the dark woods of East Texas I kept expecting to see someone in my mirrors. A figure in damp jeans and a shirt that looked too familiar, standing on the shoulder, watching, waiting, whispering for me to stop. I was driving south along Highway 77, the kind of stretch that feels like it goes on forever. Flat land on either side with scrub and mesquite trees clinging to the edges of the road. It was late, around 9:30, just after dusk. The sky was still bruised purple over the Gulf, but fading fast into black. I'd been on the road all day, pushing down from San Antonio toward Corpus Christi for a business call that I was already late for. My legs ached. My eyes burned from the headlights coming at me, and all I wanted was a quick stop to stretch and maybe grab a soda from a vending machine if I was lucky enough to find one that still worked. When I saw the old gas station long shut down, sitting off the side of the highway like a hollowed-out carcass, I almost didn't stop. It was just a shell of a building, windows boarded, pumps long rusted out and half buried in weeds. But next to it, standing crooked at the edge of the cracked parking lot, was a payphone booth. It caught my eye because you just don't see them anymore, not real ones. The glass was grime-smeared, the steel frame rusted orange, and the light on top flickered weakly. And there was someone inside it, a woman. She had her back to me, shoulder pressed against the glass as she leaned in close to the receiver. I saw her hand clutching it, her knuckles white, her body trembling with each sob. Even from the road, I could tell she was crying hard, shoulders jerking like the sound was tearing out of her. I slowed down almost without thinking, easing into the lot. Something about it was strange. The gas station was dead, long dead, and yet here was someone using a phone that shouldn't even work. I thought maybe she was in trouble, maybe her car had broken down, maybe someone had hurt her. But as my headlights swept over the booth, she didn't react. She didn't even turn her head, just kept sobbing into the handset like she hadn't noticed me at all. I parked a few spaces away and got out. The night air smelled faintly of salt, though the Gulf was miles off and the only sound was the soft buzz of cicadas in the brush. My footsteps crunched over broken glass and gravel. I called out, "Ma'am, are you all right?" She didn't answer. I moved closer, squinting. She was tall, with long dark hair that hung wet and tangled around her face, plastered against the glass. She wore a faded dress, the kind that might have been white once but was now stained with time and dirt. Her bare feet were visible through the grime of the booth floor, pale and smudged with something dark. She kept whispering into the phone between sobs. I thought I caught a word, help, but it was faint, muffled. I raised my voice again. "Do you need me to call someone?" "I can get help," she didn't respond. That's when I noticed the cord. It swung against the side of the booth, limp, frayed at the end where it had been cut years ago. The receiver in her hand wasn't connected to anything at all. My stomach tightened. I stopped mid-step, suddenly aware of how quiet it was, how the cicadas seemed to have gone still. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I stepped back, shoes crunching. Her head turned then, just a little. Not enough for me to see her face, but enough that I felt she'd heard me at last. My throat went dry. "Ma'am?" I tried again, but my voice cracked. The sobbing stopped. Dead silence. She froze in that half-turn, and I could hear the faint tap-tap of the receiver against the glass as her hand trembled. Then, so soft I thought I imagined it, came a hiss of breath through the booth's cracked door. A whisper that wasn't a cry at all, but a dry rasp, like words chewed apart by static. I couldn't make sense of them, but I knew they weren't meant for me. My heart started hammering in my chest. I wanted to bolt back to the car, but I couldn't move. I just stood there as she slowly turned her head toward me. Her face was a ruin. The eyes were wide pits, dark and shining like wet stones. Her skin hung loose and gray, lips split at the corners like she'd been screaming for years. Her mouth moved without sound at first, then the whisper bled out clearer. "Pick it up," my gaze dropped. The phone cradle was empty. The other receiver, the one she wasn't holding, was lying on the ground at my feet, cracked in half. The cord had been chewed clean through, copper strands glinting in the dark. It rattled against my shoe like it had just fallen. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself, and when I looked up, the booth was empty. The glass was fogged with streaks, handprints smeared across the inside, but there was no woman. Just the phone, still swinging on its cut cord, tapping against the glass in a steady rhythm. I turned and ran to my car. The gravel sprayed out behind me. My keys fumbled, and I didn't even bother shutting the door fully before gunning the engine. In my rearview mirror, the booth light flickered once, bright as a flare, then went out completely, leaving the lot in total darkness. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue, a trick of the light, something my mind had conjured after too many hours behind the wheel. But 2 weeks later, I passed that stretch again on the way back north. The gas station was there, still collapsed and overgrown, but the booth was gone. Nothing but a square of cracked concrete where it had stood. I slowed down, heart pounding. There was no way they'd taken it out so quickly. That kind of rot doesn't just disappear. I almost kept driving, but something pulled me to stop. I got out, cautious, and walked to the patch of concrete. The night was warm, sticky, with the faint drone of insects humming from the fields. Nothing moved. No light, no booth. Just silence. I stood there long enough that my ears began to ring. Then I heard it. The faint click of a receiver being lifted, followed by a burst of static. It came not from the lot, not from any visible place, but from the air itself, as if the sound had leaked into the world and gotten stuck here. A voice followed, faint, broken, but unmistakable. A woman sobbing, whispering words I couldn't make out except for one. Repeated over and over, softer each time. "Help." I backed away, heart in my throat, and didn't stop until I was back on the highway, tearing down the asphalt with my headlights cutting into the dark. I don't drive that way anymore. I take the long route even if it costs me an extra hour, because I know that if I ever stop there again, the phone will ring, and if I answer, I'll hear her voice clear as day, and I don't want to know what she'd say next. Highway 90 stretches like a black ribbon through the scrubland west of San Antonio, out past Uvalde, toward Del Rio, where the desert really begins to open its throat. It's the kind of road that makes a man feel small, where the stars look mean and hard and the mesquite brush rattles like bones in the wind. I was driving it late one summer night around 2 in the morning when I decided to pull off at a rest stop. I'd been fighting the wheel for hours, my eyes stinging, the buzz of the tires on asphalt making me feel like I was sliding into a dream. The sign came up sudden, white letters reflecting in the beams. Rest area. I slowed, turned in, and rolled onto the gravel lot. The place was half lit, the lamps buzzing with bugs swarming around their yellow halos. There were maybe 8 parking spaces, a pair of concrete picnic tables, and the squat block of restrooms standing off to one side. Not another car in sight, which didn't surprise me. Folks don't like pulling into those lonely stops after midnight. I cut the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, hearing the ticking of my cooling truck and the faint hiss of the cicadas out in the brush. That was when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, but then my headlights caught its eyes. A dog, huge, sitting in the dust right outside the men's restroom door. Its fur was dark, so black it seemed to swallow light, and its body looked bigger than any stray I'd ever seen. Almost wolf-sized, but heavier, with a thick chest and shoulders. It didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't blink. Just sat there watching me, those eyes glowing back red from the beams, not yellow like a deer or green like a cat. Red, the color of a brake light. My hand froze on the gear shift. Something about the stillness of that thing made my stomach tighten. A stray dog, no matter how big, would have shifted or sniffed or turned its head. This one sat like a statue carved out of the night. I muttered to myself, telling myself it was nothing, just a dog. I grabbed my thermos and pushed open the door. The night air came hot and dry, smelling faintly of dust and the sweet rot of mesquite. I stepped out, my boots crunching gravel, and glanced back. The headlights washed over the restrooms, but the dog wasn't there anymore. The doorway was empty, the dust bare. My heart gave a little jump in my chest. I scanned the lot, the brush, the shadowed tables, nothing. Just the endless stretch of thorny scrubland and the buzz of insects. I tried to laugh it off, shaking my head. Maybe the angle changed and I'd lost sight of it. Maybe it wandered behind the building. I walked toward the restroom but stopped short when I saw the ground in front of the door. The dust was marked with paw prints deep and wide, far bigger than a normal dog's. Each one sunk into the dirt as if pressed by weight, but the edges glowed faintly as though heat had burned them in. I crouched, reaching my hand near one. The dirt was warm. That was enough to make me stand back up fast. Inside, the restroom smelled like bleach and stale water. One flickering fluorescent light hummed overhead. The sinks were stained, the mirrors cracked, and the stalls all open and empty. I washed my face, trying to chase off the strange unease that had settled in my chest. My reflection looked pale and jittery, sweat shining along my hairline. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting the animal to appear in the frame, its red eyes glowing in the light. Nothing did. When I walked back out, the lot felt colder, though the air was still thick and hot. I climbed into my truck and locked the doors. I was about to turn the ignition when I heard claws scrape across the gravel behind me, slow, heavy. I twisted in my seat, peering out the back window, but saw only the empty tables and the far-off brush swaying in the wind. Then, faintly, I caught movement in the mirror, a shape, blacker than the shadows, slipping past the edge of the lot into the mesquite. That was enough. I fired the engine, gravel crunching under the tires as I pulled out. The headlights swung across the lot, and for just a second they caught it again. The black dog, standing at the edge of the brush, turned toward me. Its eyes burned red in the beams, brighter than before, like coals in a fire. Its mouth hung open just a little, and I swear I saw teeth that seemed too long, too sharp, gleaming white in the dark. Then the truck turned onto the ramp and the image slipped away behind me. I pushed the pedal harder than I should have, the speedometer climbing. My hands clenched the wheel. my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road stretched empty behind me, but I couldn't shake the sense I was being followed. My pulse pounded in my ears, and the night seemed thicker, heavier, as if it pressed in on all sides. The desert can play tricks on a man, I know that. The wind whistles, the brush moves, shadows crawl where they shouldn't. But I swear I heard it, footfalls pounding against the asphalt, keeping pace with my truck. Every so often, a flash of red in the mirror, like taillights where no car should be. I drove until the lights of Del Rio finally appeared ahead, a soft glow rising from the horizon. When I reached the first gas station, I pulled in and killed the engine. My hands trembled as I stepped out, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and asphalt. I circled the truck, crouched, checked under the chassis like a fool. Nothing. No dog. No tracks, but when I looked down at the gravel near the pump, my blood turned cold. There, pressed into the dirt, were paw prints. Big, heavy, burned into the ground like the ones at the rest stop. They led away from my truck, across the lot, and stopped at the edge of the street as if the creature had vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the motel room with the curtains drawn, staring at the floor, waiting for the scrape of claws at the door. It never came. But sometimes when I drive Highway 90, I swear I see it again. A black shadow sitting at the edge of the road, watching with eyes that glow red in the dark. I don't pull into rest stops anymore. Not after Del Rio, not after the black dog. She had been on the road since dawn, the flat Texas miles stretching out endlessly under a sky the color of old pewter. Her hands ached from the wheel. The muscles in her back knotted tight from the monotony of driving alone. The radio had long since fizzled into static as she pushed west along Highway 90, and by the time she saw the glow of the rest area sign flickering ahead, she was desperate for a break. The lot was dim, its lights buzzing faintly with that tired yellow that doesn't so much brighten the night as struggle against it. A few cars were scattered in the shadows, mostly empty pickups and a minivan with its curtains drawn. Toward the far end of the lot sat a semi, no lights on, no sound of an engine, just the hulking silhouette of its cab, slumped in the dark like some crouched beast. She parked 2 spaces over, more out of habit than choice. The air was warm and still when she stepped out, carrying with it the sour scent of diesel and dust. Somewhere far out in the brush, cicadas hummed their endless song, broken now and then by the lonely call of a night bird. She stretched, rolled her shoulders, and walked toward the restroom building, shoes scuffing against the gritty pavement. That was when she heard it. A sound soft at first, just a shift, like someone moving inside the cab of the semi. The hair at the back of her neck prickled. She slowed, turned her head. The truck sat there silent, windows black. No glow from the dash, no running lights. But again came the sound, clearer this time. A weight shifting, a faint scrape like boots against metal. Someone was in there. She froze, one hand half raised toward her phone. Logic tried to reason with her. Truckers sleep in their rigs all the time. Maybe he was just moving in his bunk. But there was something about the silence that pressed down on her. No hum of idling, no rustle of sheets. Just that deliberate scrape and a faint thump. She cleared her throat and called out, voice cracking in the hot night air. "Hello, you okay in there?" No answer. The cicadas droned on, but the sound from the cab stopped, as if whoever was inside had heard her and gone still. She swallowed, suddenly aware of the emptiness of the rest stop, how far she was from anyone who would notice if something went wrong. She backed away slowly, eyes fixed on the truck, and slid into her car. The locks clicked down beneath her fingers. Her hands shook as she dialed. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and she felt foolish explaining, but she pushed through the embarrassment. She told them there was someone moving in a parked semi at the rest stop. No lights, no response when she called out. The dispatcher said troopers were in the area and would check it out. Stay in the car, keep the doors locked. She hung up and sat there, the glow from her dash the only light in the cab. Every few seconds her eyes flicked back to the semi. She thought she saw a curtain shift behind the windshield, a ripple of shadow against shadow, but it could have been her nerves. When the patrol car rolled in 20 minutes later, red and blue lights sweeping across the lot, relief flooded her chest so sudden she almost cried. 2 troopers stepped out, their boots heavy on the pavement. They motioned for her to stay put, then approached the semi. Their flashlights cut sharp beams across the cab. One of them tugged the door handle. It swung open without resistance. The light swept inside, bouncing off chrome and cloth. Empty. The other trooper climbed up, checking the bunk, pulling open the small cupboards. No one, no clothes, no bags, no trace of a driver. Just the faint smell of old sweat and something sour, almost like burnt hair. They came back down shaking their heads, confused but calm. She rolled her window down halfway as they approached. "You sure you saw movement, ma'am?" the older one asked. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I heard it. More than once." The trooper looked back at the open cab, lips pressed tight. Then he reached in and pulled something out. A worn black logbook with curled corners. He flipped through the pages, scanning the entries by flashlight. His face shifted as he reached the last page. He showed it to his partner, who muttered something low under his breath. Then the trooper angled it so she could see. The last line, written in jagged black ink, scrawled across the page as though the pen had torn into the paper. "He's here." The words seemed to pulse under the light, stark and fresh as though they'd been written only moments before. The troopers exchanged glances. One shrugged it off with a mutter about pranks, but the older one didn't look convinced. He slid the logbook into an evidence bag and closed the cab door. They told her she could move on, no threat here, just an empty truck, probably abandoned. She drove away with her pulse still hammering in her ears. The road stretched out black and endless, headlights cutting only a shallow path into the night. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't been wrong. Someone had been in that cab, someone had heard her, and someone had written those words as the troopers pulled into the lot. Later, when she stopped at a motel on the edge of Del Rio, she opened her glove compartment for her registration. A sheet of lined paper was folded neat and flat against the manual. She hadn't put it there. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it, the ink still smelling faintly sharp and fresh. The handwriting was the same as in the logbook, the letters jagged, carved into the page with a pressing hand. It said only 3 words, centered and stark. "I see you." The rest stop outside Tyler was quiet when we pulled in, the kind of silence that feels heavier than it should, as if the pine woods pressing in from all sides were swallowing up the highway noise. My wife wanted to stretch her legs, and I figured our son needed to burn off some of his bottled-up energy before the last leg to Dallas. The place had one of those old playgrounds, the metal kind with chipped paint, faded colors, and a slide that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat since Reagan was in office. The air smelled of hot asphalt and pine sap, thick and sticky, and the dusk was settling in with a reddish haze that gave everything a strange glow. I remember the slide most of all. It had that dull aluminum sheen, bent just slightly in the middle where years of kids had worn it down. It squealed faintly in the wind, though there wasn't much breeze. Our boy, Eli, was 6, the type to dive headfirst into anything that looked fun. He sprinted across the grass with his sneakers kicking up dust and climbed the ladder, laughing. My wife walked over to the picnic tables, checking her phone for service, while I leaned against the hood of the car, watching him. I remember thinking it was almost too perfect a picture. That Texas kind of postcard moment, the fading light, the wide highway, the sleepy little rest area. Eli slid down once, whooping, his voice carrying strangely under the steel canopy of the picnic shelters. The sound seemed to echo too long, as if bouncing from tree to tree. He climbed up again, and that's when it happened. I saw him drop fast halfway down, but then his face twisted and he screamed. Not the play scream of a kid pretending to be scared, but the kind that drills straight into your bones. He tumbled off the end, hit the ground on his side, and scrambled back toward me, sobbing. My wife rushed over and we both knelt. He was clutching his ankle, tears streaking through the dust on his face. "Something grabbed me," he wailed, pointing back at the slide. His leg shook in my hand when I tried to see what was wrong. That's when I noticed the marks. 4 red prints spaced too far apart to be his own fingers, too narrow to be mine. They wrapped around his ankle like something had clutched him hard and yanked. I stood and scanned the playground. Nothing. Just the swings hanging still, chains glinting in the last sunlight, the slide gleaming faintly. The trees stood like black pillars just beyond the security light's reach. I wanted to tell myself he scraped it on the edge, but the shape of those marks left no room for imagination. They weren't scrapes, they were fingers. We decided to get back in the car and keep driving, but something made me walk back to that slide. I had this sick need to see it up close, to prove to myself it was just a trick of metal or paint or shadows. As I touched the ladder, the steel was warm from the day, but there was a dampness too, like condensation, though the evening was dry. I leaned down and saw faint streaks, smears on the underside where a child's shoes wouldn't touch. I could swear they looked like handprints pressed upward against the metal. That's when I heard it, a sharp metallic scrape from inside the slide, like fingernails dragging. I froze, staring into the hollow tube. It was dark now, but the inside seemed darker than it should have been, as if the shadows inside had weight. My gut turned over and every nerve screamed at me to leave. But I kept staring until I thought I saw something shift deep in the tunnel, a ripple of movement too quick to be clear, but the sense of something there was unmistakable. I backed away, my mouth dry, and nearly stumbled over the edge of the sandbox. My wife was shouting from the car, telling me to hurry. I forced myself to look once more at the slide. In the faint glow of the overhead light, the metal surface seemed to pulse, as though something beneath it pressed outward for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. We drove off fast, gravel popping under the tires, and the farther the headlights stretched down the highway, the more I felt that pull in my chest ease. Eli cried himself to sleep in the back seat. My wife kept asking me if I saw anything, if it could have been a bug or static shock or some crazy prank. I couldn't answer her. I just kept driving, every mile widening the gap between us and that playground. When we got home and put Eli to bed, I checked his ankle again. The marks had faded, but faint bruises remained in the exact shape of fingers, the kind of bruises you get when someone grips you and doesn't let go. For weeks after, Eli refused to go near a playground. He would cry if we suggested it. He said they could come out of the slides. I pressed him on what he meant, and he whispered that when he was halfway down, he saw a face looking up at him from inside, pale and stretched thin, with too many fingers reaching for his leg. He said it wanted to pull him in. I never told my wife about the smears I saw under the slide, or the scrape of nails, or the thing that seemed to shift inside the dark. But sometimes, when I pass a rest stop at night, I find myself slowing down, peering at the glow of those lonely playgrounds under the highway lights. And each time I remember the sound of Eli's scream and those marks blooming red on his skin. The worst part is the thought that keeps gnawing at me even now. If it hadn't let go, if it had pulled harder, what would have come out at the other end of that slide might not have been my boy at all. The thing about West Texas is that the land itself seems to lean on you, pressing down like the weight of the sun that never quite lets up. Even in the cool months when the nights dip cold enough to make you shiver, the earth feels baked through and through. Dust and mesquite and caliche that holds the day's heat long after sunset. That stretch outside Odessa, the old rest area off the highway, was one of those places I never paid much attention to before, though I must have passed it 100 times. They shut it down years back. Too many accidents on the access road, too many reports of crime. All that remained were the husks of the concrete bathrooms, a picnic table or two, and those rusted-out pumps standing like grave markers for something that used to be alive. I never expected I'd have reason to stop there, not until that night. It was late, later than I wanted to be driving, but I'd left Pecos after dark and figured I could make Odessa before midnight. My tank was running low and I'd gotten lazy about planning fuel stops. I watched the needle hover just above empty, as the wind shoved the truck around on the open highway. When I saw the glow ahead, I figured I'd lucked out. It was faint. Not the sharp fluorescent wash of a real station, but something pale and hazy. A yellowish light that seemed to float above the old rest stop sign. I knew damn well the place was closed down, but the sight of those pumps standing there in the glow made me ease my foot off the gas. My eyes caught movement, and there he was, a man standing by the far pump. He was waving, not frantically, but with a steady hand, like he'd been waiting on me. He looked to be in coveralls, a work shirt maybe, his cap pulled low. From the way he stood, one hand resting on the pump handle, he could have been any old gas station attendant from 30 years back. Something in my gut told me not to, but I slowed anyway, rolling past the broken asphalt shoulder until my headlights swept across him. The man lifted his arm higher, gesturing me closer like I belonged there. That was when I realized the pumps weren't connected to anything. The hoses dangled cut clean, the bases rusted straight through. No way fuel could flow through them. I blinked and the light went out. The man, the pumps, all of it was gone, like it had been painted on the air and someone had wiped the canvas clean. I jerked the wheel, damn near ran into the ditch, my heart pounding so hard it made my hands shake on the steering wheel. I told myself it was fatigue, headlights playing tricks. But when I looked in the rear view, I swore I saw him still standing there, pale in the red glow of my taillights. one arm raised as though he'd caught me after all. I didn't stop in Odessa. I pushed all the way into Midland, tank sputtering by the time I pulled into a Valero. The kid behind the counter said I looked like hell, and I laughed too loud, spilling coffee on my sleeve. I didn't mention the man by the pumps because who wants to admit they saw a ghost when they're 39 years old and still trying to believe in common sense? But that night in the motel, I couldn't shake the image of his face, or rather the lack of it. In the moment I slowed when my headlights hit him square, I realized I hadn't seen any features. Just a head under a cap, the impression of eyes where they should have been, but no nose, no mouth, no detail at all, like a photograph that hadn't finished developing. Every time I drifted toward sleep, I saw him waving me back, and the sound of my own breath in that stale motel room took on the rhythm of a gas pump ticking, click by click, gallon after gallon, filling something I couldn't see. A week later, on another run, I passed the same stretch. This time I didn't slow. I kept my eyes fixed on the white stripes flashing under the headlights, though I felt the itch at the back of my neck, the knowledge of someone waiting just off the shoulder. By Monaghan's, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled into a diner and asked one of the old boys nursing coffee if he remembered that rest stop. He looked at me sideways, said sure, it had been closed 10, 15 years. Folks used to avoid it even before that, he said, on account of a drifter who'd been hit pumping gas out there. The way the story went, he was siphoning from parked cars at night, and one of the semis clipped him, cut him near in half. State shut the place down not long after. They said kids would dare each other to stop and see him. The gas pump man standing there in his coveralls waiting for someone to notice. The man at the counter chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. He told me if I'd seen him, I was lucky I hadn't pulled in because the ones who did sometimes didn't make it back out. Trucks found abandoned by the shoulder, tanks bone dry, no driver ever recovered. I laughed it off in the diner, but inside I felt cold all the way down. When I got back on the road, I kept thinking about that missing face, the cut hoses, the way he'd wanted me to stop. I can't explain it right, but it felt less like a haunting and more like a trap, like he was a fisherman casting his line, and I'd been the one stupid enough to nibble. These highways out here are long and empty, and if something wanted to take you, there's 1,000 miles of desert to hide you in. I still pass that place sometimes, and I swear I catch a flicker of light from the corner of my eye, a figure shifting in the dark, waving me closer. I grip the wheel tighter and drive faster, telling myself it's nothing, but deep down I know better. Because the first time you see him, he just waves. The second time you feel him watching. And maybe the third time, when you're too tired to fight it, you'll stop. And when you do, I don't think you'll be coming back to tell anyone what you found. The first thing I noticed that night was how quiet it was. West Texas quiet is different from anywhere else I've been. It isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of an enormous stillness. A weight that presses down on your ears until you start to believe you're going deaf. That was the quiet hanging over the rest stop outside El Paso when I pulled my rig in just before midnight. The desert stretched forever in every direction, flat under a bruised sky. The kind of night where even the stars seemed reluctant to come out. The sodium lights above the lot buzzed faintly and threw sickly orange circles across the cracked pavement. But they didn't push back the darkness far enough. Beyond the edges of the lot, it was just black. The kind of black that swallows everything whole. I was bone tired, but I only meant to stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, and keep going. I parked my truck at the far edge, the engine ticking as it cooled. A couple of minivans sat closer to the restrooms, their windows shaded with towels. Families trying to sleep through the night. Other than that, the place looked abandoned. I stepped down, the air still warm from the day, but with a hint of desert chill creeping in. Gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the low cinder block building that held the bathrooms. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was wind, but the night was dead calm. Then I thought maybe a radio, somebody playing music inside one of those minivans. But it wasn't music, not really. It was singing. A woman's voice, soft and steady, drifting through the air in a tune I didn't recognize. The language was Spanish. I could make out the words, though I couldn't understand them all. But the tone carried something that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. It wasn't cheerful, not a lullaby or a song for passing time. It was mournful, almost like a prayer, every note dripping with sadness. The sound seemed to come from behind the restrooms. I slowed, listening hard. The building threw a long shadow in the parking lot, and the singing floated from the dark side, the part that faced nothing but scrub and desert. Curiosity gnawed at me even as common sense whispered that it wasn't my business. A lone woman singing in the middle of the night at a desert rest stop? That didn't add up. Still, I found my feet carrying me closer, my body tensing the way it does when something deep down knows better, but your mind hasn't caught up yet. As I rounded the corner of the restroom building, the singing stopped. Just cut off. Like somebody flipped a switch, I froze, breath shallow. The hair on my arms lifted in the cold silence. The backside of the building stretched bare and colorless, the concrete wall lined with a thin strip of gravel, then desert beyond. Nothing but sand and scattered mesquite bushes all the way out to the horizon. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt wrong to speak any louder. Nothing answered. I stepped closer, boots crunching softly on gravel, and scanned the wall, the ground, the empty desert. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. I'm not a man easily spooked, but I'll admit my throat was tight. The air itself felt heavier somehow, charged like before a lightning strike. I stayed like that, scanning for maybe a full minute before telling myself I was tired and imagining things. Long hours on the road can do that. Still, as I turned back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was watching. Inside the restroom, the fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing against the silence. I splashed cold water on my face, tried to convince myself I was just spooking myself with desert ghosts. But as I dried my hands on my jeans, I caught something faint under the hum of the light. A note, a voice far off, singing again. This time it wasn't behind the building. It was further out. I stepped back outside, my eyes straining against the dark horizon. The voice rose and fell, faint but clear, carrying words I couldn't catch but a tone that lodged itself in my chest like a stone. I found myself moving toward it again, across the edge of the lot, past the last flickering lamp into the desert black. Each step took me further from the safety of the light, and yet the song pulled at me, tugging me deeper. About 20 yards out, the ground grew uneven, sand giving way to hard-packed dirt and scattered brush. The singing grew sharper, almost close enough that I should have been able to see the woman. I stopped, scanning left and right. There was no one. The sound swelled, though, like she was right there beside me. It wrapped around me, circling in the darkness until I couldn't tell direction anymore. Panic prickled through me and I turned, hurrying back toward the glow of the lot. But the voice followed. It grew louder, more insistent, climbing into a wail, a cry that scraped along my nerves and twisted in my gut. I broke into a run, my boots pounding the dirt until I hit the gravel and then the pavement. The orange glow of the lamps wrapped around me, but the singing didn't stop. It circled the lot, darting from one side to the other, now faint, now shrill, always just beyond sight. I rushed back to my truck, fumbling the keys, the wail growing into something less human, the Spanish words dissolving into drawn-out moans. My hands shook as I climbed inside and slammed the lock down. The voice rose into a scream, high and sharp, piercing the cab until I thought the glass might shatter. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted hard. The engine roared and the scream broke off, cut clean. Silence crashed down so suddenly it made my ears ring. I sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the desert beyond the windshield. The lights hummed. The families in the minivan slept undisturbed. Nothing moved outside. I didn't wait to see if it would start again. I threw the truck into gear and pulled out, tires spitting gravel, headlights carving a narrow path through the dark. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't dare. Miles down the highway, when the adrenaline had ebbed enough to breathe, I realized something chilling. The tune she sang, the pattern of it, was still in my head, looping endlessly. No matter how I tried, I couldn't shake it. And even now, nights later, parked in a different town, far from that desert rest stop, I sometimes wake to hear it faint and low outside my cab window. A woman's voice, singing softly in Spanish, pulling me toward the dark. The sun had been brutal all afternoon, pressing down on the stretch of I-10 that cut through the endless scrubland west of San Antonio. Heat shimmered above the asphalt like rising spirits, and the two women, friends since high school, decided to pull over at a rest stop and give their aching shoulders a break. The concrete lot was half empty, a few rigs idling farther down with their drivers napping in the cool of the cabs. They carried their sandwiches from the cooler in the trunk and found a weathered wooden picnic bench under the shade of a dying mesquite tree. Even in the shade, the air was heavy with heat, sticky with it, clinging like a damp towel. Sweat collected at the base of their necks as they unwrapped their foil and took bites, glad for the break from the highway's monotony. It wasn't long before the third woman appeared. Neither of them had seen her arrive, though there was no car in sight and no crunch of gravel had announced her steps. She was simply there, as if she had been waiting, standing just beyond the reach of their shadows. She wore a plain dress, pale, almost colorless, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She smiled in a way that was polite but not quite warm, and asked softly if she could sit. The two friends nodded, shifting slightly to make room. She lowered herself onto the bench with a kind of stiff grace, and for a moment everything seemed normal. They continued their sandwiches, though one of them noticed the way the stranger's hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she weren't hungry at all, just there to rest. The silence stretched out and one of them glanced up, maybe to ask where she was headed or if she was traveling alone. But the space was empty. The woman was gone. There had been no sound of retreating steps, no motion of her rising, not even the faintest stir of air. The place where she had been sitting was vacant, yet not unchanged. The wood of the bench, bleached silver gray by years of sun, was covered in a sheen of condensation, wet as though someone had pressed ice against it. One of them laid her hand on it instinctively and jerked it back with a gasp. The wood was freezing, sharp against her overheated skin, impossibly cold in the 95-degree heat. The coldness spread like a bruise beneath her palm, numbing the flesh. They exchanged a look, the kind of glance that passes a question without needing words. Then together they stood. The sandwiches no longer tasted right, no longer seemed safe to swallow. Their drinks stayed unopened. One of them muttered that they should leave, and the other nodded. The highway, with all its dangers and boredom, seemed preferable to the strange quiet of that stop. As they gathered their things, one turned back. The bench was still marked, damp and pale where the woman had sat, and though the heat bore down with no mercy, that section of wood did not dry. It remained darkened, beaded with moisture, the way glass sweats in an air-conditioned room. They drove off, but the memory rode with them. The desert rolled past mile after mile, and the heat inside the car seemed fiercer, almost angry, though the AC worked as hard as it could. At some point, one of them lifted her hand to adjust the vent and noticed a pale impression where the cold had touched her skin. It looked like frostbite, the kind of thing you only see in the dead of a northern winter. The mark stayed for days, refusing to fade, while at night she swore she could hear someone sitting just outside her motel window, breathing in time with her own, waiting. Highway 83 at night is a black ribbon that hums and thrums under your tires like a bass string, and the country around Zapata drinks the dark and gives back heat. I had been running from Laredo toward Rio Grande City after a job that ran late, the kind of quick site visit that should have been finished by dusk, but stretched until the supervisor signed, yawned, and asked me if I minded driving at night through brush country. I told him I liked the solitude. I told myself the same thing as the clock hit midnight, and the thermometer on my dash still said 90. The river lay somewhere to my right, a blacker band inside the black held in place by Falcon Dam, and 100 stories everyone swears they never believed until the day they did. I had a styrofoam cooler on the passenger seat full of ice that had melted into a lukewarm slurry, a Whataburger bag rolled shut, and the radio drifting between Norteño and static as the stations fell away. Around 10 miles north of Zapata, the state puts in those picnic pullouts. Not full rest areas, but concrete pads and low metal roofs with a trash can and a table. I saw one come up out of the mesquite and Huisache and decided my eyes were running too hot for another hour of headlights. The sign flashed picnic area, and beyond it a scatter of live oaks and thorn bush caught the glow of my high beams like 1,000 needles blinking. I took the turnout and let the truck roll slow over Caliche. The world narrowed to the circle of my lights and the insects that swarmed into it, moths ragged as old gauze, crane flies like crooked paper clips, June bugs fumbling the windshield. I killed the engine. The sudden silence made a low ring in my ears like a bell mourned at a distance. Then the frogs started and the cicadas, a double saw that filled every corner. The air hit me with a wet slap when I opened the door. South Texas at midnight smells like dust and warm metal. It smells like the river even when you can't see it. A faint mineral tang, and like something sweet the brush keeps to itself until the sun goes down. I stood there and let sweat prick the back of my neck while the truck clicked and cooled. The metal roof over the table had a pattern punched into it, long slots meant to let heat escape. A hill of ants had colonized the pad behind the trash can. There were old charcoal smudges under the grill and a half-melted beer bottle glassed into the concrete. I remember those details clearly because they were ordinary, and because the next detail wasn't. From the trees to my left came the sound of metal on metal, a rattle so heavy it carried weight in it like a chain dropped and caught. One rattle, then a long scrape as if a loop of links dragged over bark, then another rattle from higher up, the quick talk of iron teeth clicking. I turned at once and tilted my head to find the source. There was no wind. The leaves lay heavy and slack, and the heat held still except for the insects. I told myself there was a chain in the branches from some rancher's fence repair, some piece of oil field scrap tossed up, something reasonable. I walked toward the sound until I stood at the limit of my lights and then 2 steps beyond, in the kind of dark that feels like a mouth. The chain rattled again overhead. I could not see it. I could not say which limb it clung to. I could smell something though, a wet iron smell like blood washed from a tool, old and sharp. I watched the black weave of the canopy for a full minute. The bugs crawling along the underside of leaves like sparks under glass. Nothing moved where the sound came from. The scrape traveled from left to right and then stopped dead. I swallowed and felt the warm effort of it, the way your throat works when you drink while holding your breath. I put my hand out and touched the nearest trunk. The bark under my fingers was cool, not just less hot than the air but cool, as if a cold vein ran in it. I pressed my palm flat and felt the tree drink heat from me the way stone sellers drink heat from men. I took my hand away and drew it across my shirt like I'd put it into water. There is a point in the night when you can either pack the oddity away and set it on a shelf labeled stupid little noises, or you can let it climb onto your shoulder and ride with you a while. I stood there wavering, listening to the chain that wasn't there and the insects that were, feeling the cool with my nerves, until a truck blew by on 83 and ripped the world back open with its air. The red tracer of its taillights drew a line out of the dark and took my doubt with it. I went back to my table, sat on the edge of the bench and dug a warm soda out of the cooler. The first swallow hit my teeth like pudding. The chain rattled again, and this time I didn't turn. I told myself the sound lived in the trees the way a cricket's chirp lives in grass. I told myself I had a long stretch still to drive and that a little creep, like a little caffeine, might help me keep awake. I lasted another 2 swallows before the cold reached me. It came from behind and to my right. A sheet of winter laid across the bare skin of my arm. I froze at once as every hair on that arm rose against it, and a second later my shoulder blades clenched. The bench under me felt like meat taken from a freezer and dropped onto a counter. I put my palm down and held it there, and a slow ache started up through the bones of the hand into the wrist and along the forearm. The pain of ice when you stand in a river too long. The night hadn't changed. The air was still 90. The insects still sawed away. The bench and the skin on my arm were not part of that world. I stood up quick and the bench creaked under the change in weight, a soft groan of wood, though it was concrete and had no reason to give voice. I backed toward my truck and caught the flicker of something small at my boot, something that wobbled and winked in the headlight spill. I stooped and picked it up. It was a chain link. Not a small link for a swing or a dog leash, but a wide link from a heavy chain, cut or broken at one end. It was old and the rust had grown soft on it so that it marked my fingers with orange powder. It had weight that surprised me. I turned it in my palm and the metal was colder than the bench, as if it had been lying at the bottom of a stream. I put it on the table because I did not want it in my truck with me. As it touched the concrete, it gave off a dry rattle and slowly settled on one side like a coin. The tree to my left sighed without moving. It is the only way to say it. The sound was air moving through limbs, but the leaves did not stir, and no breeze crossed my face. The iron smell grew stronger. A thought came in with it. Not a voice, but a full shape of memory, the way certain smells can run a picture into your head. I saw a flooded pasture with the tops of barbed wire fences running like stitch marks between the crowns of oaks. I saw a gray river swelling where it shouldn't be, and a man standing waist-deep holding up something tied to a limb, working with his hands to lift more weight than his body could bear. The picture left me as quickly as it came. It made no sense. Falcon Lake had drowned the old town long before my time, and there were always stories about what the water took and hid, cemeteries and roads, and once a black Angus carcass that floated for days and spooked boats. I picked up the chain link again without telling myself I would, and set it in the truck bed with a small, careful toss that tried to say I wasn't carrying this thing across a county line. By then my chest had that tight hollowness you get when you have looked too long at something you cannot see. I climbed in and shut the door and locked it, an act that felt childish and rational at once. The ignition caught on the second crank. The sound of the engine settled into the same steady idle it always had. I put the truck into drive, tipped my head to my left to glance into the mirror, and saw the outline of a hanging figure in the space where my lights fell short. It registered the way shapes do when they want to be noticed. Ask 10 people what a shape like that looked like and you'll get 10 different descriptions, because the mind builds the details after the fact. I will tell you what mine decided. A long dark form, legs together, head bent, the straight vertical of a rope or chain from above, and the shallow swing of mass over time, not vigorous but present. I slammed the brake so hard the cooler lurched off the seat and wedged against the fire extinguisher in the footwell. The figure didn't stop moving. It was behind me, not in the road, not anywhere the collision of a quick stop should have addressed. I stared at it through the glass rectangle of the mirror another 2 seconds, then another 2, and then I looked over my shoulder at the real world where my bed and the trees and the concrete pad lived. There was nothing there. The insects sawed. The metal roof shone with the dull glow of bugs. My tailgate showed me a flat sheet of silver paint. I looked back at the mirror and the outline hung exactly where it had been. The minute swing, the bent head, the straight line to what may have been a branch or may have been the top edge of the mirror itself, which was an ugly thought that arrived without knocking. I did not speak. I put my hands at 10 and 2 and eased the truck forward. The outline did not follow the tree line the way a reflection would. It followed the interior geometry of the glass rectangle that framed it. When I accelerated and the truck moved, the outline held behind me at the same size and position, not shrinking the way objects do when you leave them. This felt wrong in a calculus that my eyes and hands had learned by long practice. I told myself I needed to go. I tried not to tell myself I needed to outrun something. When my front tires found the highway, I pressed the accelerator harder than I should have. The tires chirped. The truck bed bounced once as it rolled out of the rough and onto the smooth blacktop. I did not look into the mirror, and because I did not, a noise came from the back like something heavy slapping and dragging across corrugation, a chain paying out across ridged steel. The sound stuck to the cab. I could feel it through the seat. The first miles were a page or two torn out of a book. I know there were roadside shrines with white crosses and bottle caps. I know the ghost of a billboard frame passed on my left, a skeleton with no skin. I know I took the curve at a speed that scolded me with tire squeal. When I finally looked into the mirror again, it was because the habit is stronger than fear. The outline was there. It did not strain or thrash. It hung, paying no attention to the movement of the world. The reflection of my own eyes bobbed in the glass alongside it and made the thing look closer than it should have, as if it were almost inside. I don't remember pulling into the stripes. I remember the relief of fluorescent light and the empty forecourt except for a pump canopy that hummed louder than the insects. I parked crooked across 2 slots and got out and raised my head to the white glare on the ceiling. A young guy behind the glass door looked up from his phone and glanced at me, and then tried not to look again. I walked around the back of the truck because I had to, because a part of me wanted the insult of not finding any physical cause, wanted to punch that insult into the night until it bled reason. The tailgate had 3 long arcs on it, bright as if they had been sanded in with fresh grit. 3 shallow crescents that started at the top and slid down toward the bumper. At the far right corner, a smear of something darker had dried into a tide line. It looked brown in the white light. I touched it and smelled it and told myself I smelled rust. "Sir?" the kid behind the glass said when I came in. "You all right?" He had a Star Wars shirt and acne he hadn't outgrown yet. The store smelled like Fabuloso and hot dogs on rollers. I bought a bottle of water and a coffee I wouldn't drink and stood at the counter too long gathering myself. "Those trees up the road," I said. "Picnic area." "You know the one?" "I know it," he said. He kept his eyes on the scanner. He did not look like he wanted the next line. "You ever hear chains in the trees over there?" He swallowed with his mouth closed, a small movement that showed in his throat. "People say things," he said. "My uncle says they used to tie stuff up during the flood times. Cows, deer, boats, I don't know." "We got wind that comes without wind sometimes. Comes from the trees," I said. He shrugged as if the movement could shake a thought out of his shoulders. "I leave them alone is what I do," he said. "You want a receipt?" I went back out with the water and stood at the open door of the truck and let the light spill over the interior. The mirror showed me my own tired face and the end cap of the aisle behind me inside the store. It also showed me the outline again, because that's how that night had decided to work. And it was worse under the stripes lights because the shape took more definition it didn't deserve. The head was set at a tilt that had nothing pitiful in it. The legs hung too close together. A length of something too thick for rope ran up out of the frame into the bright nothing under the canopy, where no branches grew. I reached up and wrenched the mirror off with both hands. It doesn't take much if you catch the little ball joint in the right leverage. The mirror came away with a small, hard pop. I dropped it on the passenger floor and felt like a fool and felt like a man who had opened a door to see if the fog was only fog. The feeling was not relief. The outline had not lived in the mirror. It had lived in the angle of seeing, and there are plenty of angles in a windshield. I drove the last hour with my back against the seat like it could pass through into the bed and hold whatever wanted holding out there. The chain sound came and went. At one point I felt weight on the truck that changed the way it sat on its springs, as if a large person had climbed onto the tailgate and remained there, swaying with the ride. When other vehicles appeared, I felt a panic I couldn't name that they would see what I carried. And the thought came that if someone looked and saw and reacted, they might honk or try to pass or flash their brights. And if they did, I would have to see what they saw by the light of their attention. Nobody passed me for miles. When someone finally did, a maroon Silverado with a toolbox across the back. The driver cut into the opposite lane without a glance and went by at a speed that said he had somewhere important to be and didn't need a show. I reached my motel in Rio Grande City at 2. An old 2-story with a courtyard and a pool that had been drained sometime around July. The clerk had a TV murmuring behind him and slid the key across without comment. In the room, I closed the curtains and looked at the blackout fabric until my vision turned blue. I took my shirt off in the bathroom and saw a pale, raised ring at the base of my throat, a half-formed bruise that traced the line where a tie would lie. I touched it and it didn't hurt. I lay on the bed and the air conditioner cut itself on and off with a sick humming sound like a refrigerator from a rental house. I did not sleep. Sometimes the chain rattled faint as a dog collar. Sometimes it didn't and the silence was worse. In the morning, the bruise had darkened. It looked like someone had taken a thick cord and set it on me while I lay still. I went out to the lot intending to scour the bed of my truck for that chain link I'd thrown, intending to throw it farther and make a show of wanting an ordinary day. The bed was dry. The link was there. It sat in the groove near the cab and caught the sun like a coin on a sidewalk. Not warm, not cold. Not anything you'd give a second glance in the light of day. When I picked it up, the cold came back into my palm like water from a secret pipe. I kept the thing in a zippered pocket of my soft-sided cooler the way a person keeps a weird rock he found on a beach. It came home with me against my intention, not because I forgot it, but because throwing it away in daylight felt dramatic and wrong in a new way. It went onto a shelf in my garage near the tie-down straps and the jumper cables. At night that week, my oak tree in the front yard woke up sounding like a flagpole in wind. The chain noise was not loud, and it did not persist when I turned on the porch light. The same way frogs stop singing when they hear your footstep. Twice I saw a shape from the street that could have been a shadow from the neighbor's truck, or could have been something off the ground. I told one person about it. A friend at work who grew up in Hebronville and thinks the border is one long story that knows your name even if you don't know it. He said without smiling that highway crews used convict labor all over the state 60 and 70 years ago, and that in places they chained men to trees when the day ended so they wouldn't run. He said storms move strange over Falcon and that sometimes they leave things up in the branches where they shouldn't be. He said to give the link back to where I got it. He said it in the tone you use when you tell a child to put a frog back under its log. I took 83 down on a Saturday afternoon with the chain link wrapped in a shop vac bag like something that might leak. The day was the kind that peels you. Sky so white blue that it looks new out of a wrapper, and the heat lying like a plate on the land. I passed hunters' blinds and gates with brands burned into them and a border patrol truck angled into the brush. The picnic area looked smaller than it had in the night. The metal roof threw little heat shimmers into the air. The table had a rash of cigarette burns on it I hadn't noticed before. I put the link on the concrete, and for a long time nothing happened, except for what always happens to a man who comes back to a place he shouldn't have visited twice. I felt watched in the impersonal way that landscapes watch when you bring them back a piece of their own weather. I stood and waited for a wind that didn't come. And then I waited for the chain to rattle without wind. And when neither gave me a sign, I said aloud that I was leaving this and that whatever I had picked up, I was picking up no more. It felt foolish and it felt right. I turned to go and the bench spoke. It was only a tiny creak, a whisper of weight on weight, but in the silence it was enough. I didn't turn back. I walked to my truck and opened the door and sat with my hands on the wheel until sweat ran into my eyes. In the mirror, which I had taped back onto its mount with electrical tape, the outline waited. It hung at the same distance it had before. Its tilt had not changed. The chain that rose above it reached into the bright air, where there were no branches to hold it. As I watched, a shimmer of heat ran through it from bottom to top like a school of minnows coming about. I reached for the mirror and then stopped. I lifted my hand to my throat and then stopped. I drove away with it riding in the squared glass and did not look again until I had to, and when I did, it was still there. And some part of me that keeps accounts wrote in a tight hand that distance was not a factor. That night, my oak tree moved without moving, the leaves a black lace against a sulfur streetlight, the limbs too heavy for nothing to be on them. Around 2 a.m., my phone lit the room with a glow that made no sense. I had no missed calls, no messages. The camera app was open by itself and had taken a picture. The frame showed my dark window and the faint reflection of my face, and hanging in the square of night beyond, the outline at the same size and the same angle it had been in the mirror and on the highway, and in the notion that had formed of it. I did not hear a chain then. I heard only the refrigerator hum of my own house pretending to be alive. I have learned to drive other routes. The map looks different when you make rules for yourself about what you won't pass. In the grocery store freezer aisle, the cold creeps up through the toes of my shoes, and I find myself stepping away quick without meaning to. I still keep a strap in the garage for tying down plywood, and the ratchet mechanism clicks like a sound I know from someplace else. On the hottest days of August, when the light bleaches everything in the yard and the live oak casts a patch of shade that looks like water, a chill runs from my wrist to my throat if I stand under it. People talk about cold spots in haunted houses as if they are rooms you can walk out of. Outside there are roofs and trees and distances and a line of glass above every dashboard that makes a room where there wasn't one. If you ask me whether I believe, I will tell you I believe in weight. I believe in the burden of things that cannot rest where they were left. I believe in iron that remembers grip and friction. I do not know who the figure was or what the chain tied to before I saw it, or whether the man in my moment of borrowed memory was saving cattle or raising something else. I know a bench went cold and a link showed up in my hand, and a shadow has learned the shape of my rear view. If I pass a place with oaks that overhang the road, I look at the space inside the leaves and tell myself it is empty. If it isn't, I keep my eyes on the lane because there are only so many times you can bring a thing into focus before it finds a way to live in your glass. I had been on the road for 14 hours by then, pushing west through the long, thinned-out dark that lives beyond Ozona and Sheffield. That open-shouldered, sage-scented dark where the stars feel close enough to warm your teeth when you smile. I was 23, full of the cheap bravery that comes from a gas station coffee and a car that still smells like new plastic, and I was determined to reach El Paso by midnight. Somewhere past Fort Stockton, just after the interstate's lanes lifted to cross a dry wash and the mesas lay like sleeping cattle on either side, my eyelids began to stage their small rebellion. I told myself what every tired driver tells himself. I only need 5 minutes. I'll pull over at the next turnout, keep the engine running, set a timer, close my eyes, and I'll be right as rain. The turnout arrived with a rusted barrel of a trash can and a sign that said, "No overnight parking." I clicked on my hazard lights, rolled down the window to let the wind scrape in, and let my head tip back. The land had a night voice out there. It was the whisper of mesquite on chain link, distant grit hissing across pavement, the far-off clank of something metal settling to its last heat of the day. I closed my eyes to that voice and felt myself tilt. He woke me by tapping on the glass 3 quick knuckles near the seam where the mirror stock meets the window. When you're half asleep and someone taps right by your head, the sound doesn't feel like sound. It feels like the shape of a word you've forgotten. I startled up and saw the brim first. The hat was the kind troopers wear here, that flat, wide-brimmed campaign hat with a dark band, and the face beneath it was cut into shadow by the red-blue pulse that washed over my interior, though I hadn't seen a car pull up. He had the kind of officer posture you learn from years of carrying yourself as a warning and a comfort at the same time. His hand rested near his belt. The other hand held a small clipboard I would later think was wrong, in a way I couldn't identify at the time. The uniform fit him like it had been hanging in a dry closet for a very long time, pressed without a wrinkle. The light slid across his badge and star and the silver nameplate, but it never found his eyes. Or maybe I didn't look into them. I was busy being 23 and startled and stupid. License and insurance, he said, and it came out kinder than it had to be. Then he leaned in, eyes scanning the empty passenger seat and the back seat with its mess of duffel and a cooler, and a folded map I kept because my father told me phones die and paper doesn't. Been a long day, son? His voice wasn't big, but it filled the car. I fumbled for the glove box. I started to explain what I was doing, that I was only going to be 5 minutes and then I'd get back on the road, that I hadn't seen a rest area since Fort Stockton, that I knew the sign but I wasn't staying. He let me talk until my words ran out. Then he did something that doesn't fit the story of a tired driver and a trooper at midnight. He took one small step back, angled his shoulders so the refraction of his light slid off my windshield and into the dark. And he said, softly but with a weight I felt in my wrists, "Leave immediately. Don't argue. Don't rest. Don't look back. Gas up at the next station and keep going. Do you understand me? That's not a normal instruction. It's not even a normal warning." I turned my head in confusion, which was when I noticed his patrol car in my mirror. It hadn't been there when I pulled in. That was the first odd thing. The second was that it was an older Ford, the kind with a whip antenna on the trunk and a push bar that looked like it could shove a bull out of the aisle at a livestock show. The paint had the muted tone of a car that had seen too many summers. There was an emblem on the door, but the light made it unreadable. I've done something wrong, I thought, though I didn't know what. He saw my confusion and did not change expression. "You need to go," he said, and I realized it wasn't a suggestion. It was the thing he could give me in the place of a ticket that would accomplish what he wanted accomplished. He set the edge of the clipboard on my windowsill and slid a piece of paper under my fingers. It was a caution notice, the kind they sometimes give in place of a citation. All the lines and boxes printed in light purple with a space for a signature. My name and license were written in a narrow hand that looked like it had been taught by nuns. The date was there. The mile marker was there. The box for reason contained one word: unsafe. He didn't ask me to sign it. He didn't ask me to acknowledge it. He held my gaze for as long as it takes to decide which fork in the road you're going to take, and then he stepped back again, one hand up like a man directing a car into a space. I went. I did it the way you do when authority lends its weight to your bones and moves them for you. I put the car in drive, eased forward, and watched him in the mirror as he returned to his car. The lights didn't roll away behind me. They stayed where they were, pinned to the turnout as if he'd driven them into the gravel. The wind had picked up and it drummed hard on the side of my car until I paralleled the dark wash and crossed it, and the world widened again. Then the road went quiet. It was a quiet I felt the way you feel the absence of a headache you've been carrying all day. The sign for the next gas station appeared. I signaled like a good citizen and pulled off, only then realizing I had 2 crescents of sweat under my arms and a lip bitten almost bloody. The station wasn't much. They rarely are when the interstate is wide and the towns are far apart. There was a sheet metal awning with 4 pumps under it, and a convenience store with humming lights full of moth ghosts. Even at that hour, there were 2 pickups parked nose to nose and a third idling with an empty horse trailer hitched to it. The woman at the counter had the kind of face that could have belonged to a dozen ages, somewhere between 35 and the sanded endurance of someone 20 years older. She was reading a paperback with a rubber band around it to keep the pages from splaying and eating sunflower seeds out of a foam cup. I set the caution notice on the counter with my debit card. "Do you get troopers out here often?" I asked, because the question came out of my mouth before I could hold it. She lifted her eyes to mine, then down to the paper, then up again in a slow, searching way that made the back of my neck go hot. "No," she said, and her voice had the gravel of a road that someone stopped repairing a few seasons back. "We haven't had one out this way in years. Not regular, not like a route. County handles most of it." She tapped the notice with a fingernail. "Where'd you get that?" Out at the turnout past the wash, I said. Mile marker 263, I think. He told me to leave immediately. I feel stupid now. I was just tired. She turned her head like she was listening to a sound that came from a long way off. Without breaking eye contact, she reached under the counter and brought up a small picture frame. The cheap kind with a cardboard back and a bent wire for a leg. The glass had a crack in it that ran from corner to corner. Behind it, a yellow clipping with a photograph blackened with age. A trooper in a hat. An older Ford. A wreck on the shoulder that had the low, killed look of a wreck that had happened a long time ago. That's Trooper Cade, she said, and the name dropped into my ear with the heavy neatness of a coin into a jar. He died out there in '98. Tanker drifted. Night wind like this. He was laying flares for a rollover and the driver never saw him. They say you can still smell the fuse on hot days. She held the frame a little higher, as if the angle of the fluorescent could peel his face back into clarity. They retired his number. No trooper works that stretch regular. She stared at the paper in my hand again, and at my face as if she were adding numbers that did not want to be added. What did he look like, I told her. I told her the hat, the kind of car, the older push bar, the way the reflector strip on his jacket didn't catch the light the way plastic catches it now. She nodded very slowly, then set the frame back down so the crack in the glass cut the trooper's left eye in two. She slid my card back to me, then the caution notice, then a napkin. Turn it over, she said. On the back of the caution notice, where the pressure of the pen had dented the paper, there was an impression, not ink, the ghost of a line. I tilted it toward the light until it showed. Badge 217, that was it. No signature. No scribbled, unreadable officer scrawl, just that. She let me look until looking wouldn't help. Then she said, "You did right by leaving. Some folks don't. Don't stay out there. If you're tired, sleep here in your car under the lights. I'll keep an eye." I nodded because the kind of gratitude I felt wouldn't fit out of my mouth. I bought a coffee I didn't want, and a pack of peanuts to have something to do with my hands and went back to my car. I sat with the door open and the country's hum in my ears. The air had that cooled coin taste it gets at that hour. The taste of iron and sunk heat lifting. I set the caution notice on the dash and turned on my phone to scroll out the uneasy energy in my fingers. The phone took longer than it should have to wake. When it did, the dashcam app had a notification. Motion detected. I hadn't remembered leaving motion detection on. I tapped the alert and watched the video play. It was as if a tiny piece of the world had been scraped free of sound and color and motion and laid at my feet. The clip showed my car from the moment I pulled into the turnout. 3 minutes of my hazard lights ticking off to the side like a metronome in a patient's room. Nothing moving except the wind. Then, no sound of approach, no slant of light crossing the scrub. There was a bloom of red-blue in the rear window like a wound opening. A shape crossed the glass, a hat brim slicing a line across the frame, and a gloved hand touched the door. When he leaned in, the camera should have taken his reflection off the glass and smeared his face into any face. But the frame jittered as if something in the electronics had hit a bump. For a breath, the picture buckled. In that breath, the audio, which is never good at night, rose out of the static with clarity I can't explain. "Leave immediately," said my own voice, but slow, as if it had come up from the bottom of a well. I closed the app like it had burned me. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and looked at their topography, the little tan lines and black half-moons under the nails. I realized then that my window smelled faintly of sulfur and hot fuses, and that my shirt had picked up a dry, acrid scent I couldn't place. The caution notice watched me from the dash. I tucked it into the sun visor and told myself the thing you tell yourself when something you can't explain brushes the back of your neck. Fatigue does odd things. Texas does odder. Go. I made El Paso by 3, found a motel with a carpet that gave under the shoe like a sponge, and slept in the shape of the steering wheel. The next morning, when I flipped the visor to block the sun, the caution notice fell into my lap. I meant to throw it away and didn't. I kept it the way you keep something given to you by someone who should not have been able to give it. For days I didn't talk about it. Then I did what you do when a strange story grows restless inside you. I told it. I told it to a coworker in a break room in a way that made the vending machine hum quieter. I told it to my father on the phone while he said, "Uh-huh," in the way of a man who has seen a great many odd things and made his peace with not understanding all of them. I told it to myself when I woke at 3 and the room's corners were too dark. Each telling rubbed a little smoothness into it and also took something away I couldn't afford to lose. 2 months later, coming back east from Tucson in a heat that turned the horizon into a mirage of old glass, I found myself watching the signs for Fort Stockton with a small gravity in my chest, like a dropped marble rolling toward a cabinet's corner. I told myself I wanted to stop at that gas station and thank the woman again. The truth is, I wanted to go back to the turnout and set my tires in the marks where they'd been and see it with my full rested eyes. I wanted to look the place in the face and ask it what it wanted from me. The wind was up again when I reached the long bridge over the arroyo. The turnout sat there the way it had, shoulder of packed caliche and a border of scraped brush. A plastic bag worried itself back and forth against a bit of fencing. The barrel was still there. I parked and sat with both hands on the wheel and let the engine tick cool. I told myself I would get out, look at the ground, do the small act of paying attention, the respectful thing, and then go. The sun was still high, the kind of white that bleaches the edges off the world. I stepped out into heat that lifted my hair. The smell was stronger in daylight. Not sulfur, I realized. Phosphorus. Flare ends. That red-hot match smell. The shoulder had scars. Black freckles where something had once burned in a circle. The arcs like punctuation in a sentence you could only read from above. I crouched. In the black was a tiny curl of metal like a bird's claw. When I touched it, heat leaped into my fingertip, fresh as if a hand had just lifted a flare there and set it down on the edge of now. I stood with the reflex that goes with sudden pain and sucked at my finger. A shadow fell across the culvert 100 feet down the slope that felt wrong for the hour. It was the shape of a truck casting itself across the gap, but there was no truck. I backed up with my heart banging like a kid at a locked door. On the wind came the thrum of a Jake brake and then nothing. I didn't sleep near there. I didn't even gas up in town. I drove to Ozona with my jaw clenched and the radio off and the caution notice for reasons I can't defend, pulled down from the visor and tucked into my pocket like a talisman. In Ozona, while I ate a burger that tasted of its wrapper, a deputy with a face like a granite marker sat 2 stools down and told the waitress he'd been out by the wash for an hour, looking for skid marks and never found any that weren't rained 6 months old. He caught me looking and lifted his chin in that universal Texas gesture that means, "Go on then, talk." I asked what he knew about Trooper Cade and Mile 263. He looked at my hands. He looked at the line my shirt had left on my forearm, the faint crosshatch where the seatbelt had printed itself during long hours. He looked at my face like we were coming to a deal and he needed to watch for the small flinch that says you're lying. Then he told me a story in an even tone like a man reading a citation aloud at a courthouse. Cade was quiet, he said, and good at talking drunks into sense and stubborn ranchers into letting him set cones where they didn't want cones. One night a rollover went bad. Tanker belly up, cargo sloshing, the kind of dark where your flashlight finds your breath before it finds the road. He set flares and wave patterns. He did it right. A gust hit and a driver coming over the rise saw wind and heat before he saw the man. The man went under. The driver didn't stop. They lifted Cade out of the groove he made in the shoulder like you lift a bread loaf out of a pan. They named a scholarship after him. They said his wife never came to the ceremony. The deputy picked up his coffee. "You best keep going when he tells you to," he said. "Wind comes across there wrong." I nodded. He smiled the way old men smile at young men when they want to lend them some steady. Then he asked me how the burger was and changed the subject. I didn't plan to go back. That would have been the brave thing to choose in a story like this. And I didn't have that kind of courage. But a year is a long road. It turns and you find yourself on it again. Another trip west for another reason that feels important when you're young and less so later. Another fatigue settling like a cat in the passenger seat. Another thought. Just 5 minutes. I will park with both wheels on the gravel. I will leave it running. I will keep my hands on the wheel. If he comes, I will thank him. I wanted that more than I can explain. Gratitude can be like a stone you carry in a shoe. It was colder that night. A front had come in and the air felt scraped clean. The kind of dry that makes your nose sting. The stars had been dusted out to the far fence posts. I rolled down the window and let it in because I've always believed in the medicine of cold air. I don't know how long I had my eyes closed. The tap came again. 3 knuckles. Same place. I turned my head and already knew the brim would be there and the shape beneath it and that calm, heavy voice. "Son," he said, and there was something else in it this time. A fatigue, maybe, or disappointment he was trying to keep out of the words. "I warned you before. You need to leave." "I am leaving," I said. And then I did the unwise thing, the human thing. I added, "Thank you." He tilted his head a fraction like an old dog listening. "For what?" he asked, and the question hollowed that cold air. "For the warning," I said. "For the first time. At the station they told me about you. I said your name because I thought you should have your name. That was the second unwise thing. Names call things closer." His mouth tightened. For a second, the red blue pulled away from his face and I saw the skin of his cheek. It was wrong. There was a smoothness to it, a uniformity like the way a candle softens under glass. "Leave," he said, and what had been weight became a crack that might open if I didn't step where he told me. His hand came up and smacked the roof once, firm as a judge. "Now." I went to put it in drive and the engine hiccuped. The dash lights shivered. I looked down for a quarter second at the idiot lights blooming, and then the world came apart. There was a noise like a building sighing, followed by the long, low scream of rubber on concrete and a crushing metallic groan that ran right through me and set my teeth on a bad edge. I looked up to see a long, dark shape bearing over the culvert, a tanker's shadow set loose from whatever truck was pulling it. It was impossible, and it was happening. The trailer had come loose, or I had fallen into some pocket of time where the first night was happening again. It moved with a lazy insistence, heavy as weather. The patrolman stepped into the lane, put his body between me and the oncoming, and raised both hands the way a father raises them to stop a child from walking into the fire pit. The trailer came through him like rain through smoke and clipped the corner of my bumper. The car slid sideways a foot. Something tore plastic and metal and made grief sounds. The wind rolled back. The trailer vanished into the angle of the night. There was only my speeding heart, and the rattle of the sun visor falling open and my caution notice slipping down into the footwell. I looked at him. He was looking past me down the road with a watchfulness that made the skin between my shoulder blades tighten, like there was someone else behind me waiting his turn. He lowered his hands. He walked up to my window so close I could have reached and touched the edge of his jacket. The stitched letters of the department were hard with age. There were tiny crystals of something like salt along the seam, as if he had dried out 100 times and left evidence each time around the edges. He pointed at the open visor. He pointed at the paper in the footwell. Then he said, "Clear as any instruction I've ever received, you never wait here. You never look back. You don't think you are the exception. You understand me?" I nodded. My head hurt with the speed and violence of saying yes. The pain in his voice had been like the pain of a man who has learned slowly and with great cost that some people cannot be saved. He stepped back, and for a moment the brim of his hat broke the line of the stars. The brim angled down in the cover gesture troopers use when wind is full of grit. It looked absurdly like a salute. Then the red-blue pulled away like a tide, and the night filled back in where it had been. I was alone in a road turnout with a new tear in my bumper, and hot nerves and a car that felt 4 inches shorter. I drove to Fort Stockton on tires that didn't trust me. The gas station was lit and empty. The woman at the counter had been replaced by a man whose hair had found the halfway point between gray and white, and decided to pitch a tent there. I asked about her, and he said she hadn't worked there in months. He said it with the casual absence of a man talking about the weather. When I asked about Cade, he nodded the nod of someone used to that name, leaning over the counter. He pointed at the wall near the restrooms. There was a corkboard with layers of paper thumbtacked into each other, and a faded flyer for a church barbecue. Tucked under the curl of a calendar was the same yellow clipping in the same cheap frame. The crack in the glass had spidered out now, branching like a dry wash on a topo map. On the frame, someone had scrawled a note years ago in blue marker. "Leave when told." Under it, 3 sets of initials, each with a date. I don't remember deciding to do what I did next. I took the caution notice from my pocket. The back had that pressed badge number 217. I had a pen from a bank in Abilene or Lubbock. I wrote the date. I added my initials where the pen would fit. The man behind the counter watched me with no expression. When I finished, he said, "Coffee's fresh if you want it." I took some. I stood by the window with the coffee warming my hand and watched a truck pass, then another, then a stretch of nothing so large it felt like the world had ended in both directions and no one had noticed yet. I have tried in the years since to make sense of how many times I have seen him. At first it was only there at mile 263, as if he were bound to that patch of shoulder the way a piece of metal is bound by the magnet under the table. Then it wasn't just there, Late one January, when black ice had turned the flyovers in Dallas into a game of chance, I lingered too long at the top of a ramp waiting for an opening that would get me ahead of the snarl. And a rap came at the glass and I glanced over to see the brim, tilted against a new kind of wind, city wind. I left the ramp and lived to hear the sirens build and cry behind me. Twice on the Gulf Freeway during summer storms when rain fell in glass rods and drivers forgot how physics works. Once back outside Fort Stockton when a dust devil spun out of the scrub and made a wall that ate taillights whole. Each time the same measured voice, the same few words, the same instruction that felt less like a warning and more like the rules you teach a child at the swimming pool that keep the child alive until the child learns to know the water's moods. Each time I left, each time I did not look back. There are nights when I think he pulled me from something that wanted me and is annoyed to have been denied. There are other nights when I think the arithmetic of the world demands its equal and that what he took out of that place has to be put back somewhere else. On those nights, I check my mailbox twice and look up too long in the mirror and sleep in the middle of the bed with the hallway light on. On good nights, I think of him as a man who learned how to stay in the place he died because it gave him one more chance to put his hands up and stop a thing from happening. You live with a story like this in the same way you live with a scar in a place only you see. It tightens when rain is coming. It reminds you that your skin remembers more than you do. On the dash of my car, tucked up against the seam of the instrument panel, I keep a scrap torn from the edge of a carbon copy. It is not the caution notice that I mailed, with a letter I could not write correctly to an address I found on a page that lists scholarships and memorials, addressed to a family I never met. What I kept was the corner of the page that had pressed that number into it. If I tilt it in the right light, if I hold it at the angle his patrol car washed across my windshield, I can still see it. 17, the numbers are shallow. They don't catch a fingernail, but they catch light. Sometimes I take roads that don't go near Fort Stockton, and sometimes I can't help myself and I let the wheels drift that way, as if something under the car is pulling them. At night, when the wind is up and the signs glow like relics and the land breathes out the heat it's swallowed all day, I hold the wheel and talk to my father's map on the passenger seat. I tell it the names of the towns like prayers, and I watch the far red eye of my hazard button, the way you watch a coal at the edge of a fire. When the rap comes, and it will, at some place I haven't guessed yet, I will put the car in drive and move. I will not wait. I will not look back. I will carry that voice with me like a hand on my shoulder. And if the night hums wrong and the window glass smells like spent matches and a brim cuts off the stars, I will lift a hand, not in salute and not in thanks, but in recognition, as if I am seeing a man I knew in another kind of life. 'Cause in a way I did. Because once, in a turnout past a dry wash under a sky big enough to fold the whole world inside it, a patrol officer leaning into my window let me go.